Let us know now, before the debate has come to a conclusion. Moreover, you may request a blue card during the blue card procedure, and you can also make requests for the floor. Now, speakers will take the floor from the central rostrum, except for those speeches that will take place under the heading of the blue card procedure. So please approach the rostrum as you see your speaking time coming up. And now I'd like to give the floor to the Commissioner Šefčovič.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Honourable members, heat waves are among the deadliest disaster risks in Europe. They hit the most vulnerable people, and while at the same time, usually those who are the most difficult situations are at the biggest risk. At the same time, we see it also this summer, the increased risk of sparkling wildfires. On top of it, heat waves contribute to water shortages and exacerbate droughts, as we can see in northern Italy these past days. The tragic event in Marmolada is just the latest example of disaster risks linked to warmer temperatures and thus to climate change. The EU's Emergency Response Coordination Centre is monitoring the situation and stands ready to coordinate EU assistance if needed by Italian authorities. As you probably heard, the Copernicus Emergency Management Service, these are our Earth observation satellites operated by the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, provide information for emergency response for different natural hazards like floods, wildfires and droughts. And its statistics show that since 2017 we have witnessed the most intense forest fires ever seen in Europe, and that we unfortunately expect the 2022 forest fire season could follow this trend. Similarly, the Copernicus Emergency Management Service indicated that the present drought in Europe could become the worst ever. If we are looking at the situation of the past years, we've been doing our utmost to learn from this experience, and therefore the Commission has built an effective and flexible disaster response capacity under the Union Civil Protection Mechanism. However, emergency support and response alone are not enough. Climate adaptation, disaster risk reduction and disaster preparedness are paramount. And this is true for Europe as well as for the rest of the world. So let's take the example of forest fires. In the context of the European Green Deal, we strive to make our forests more biodiverse and more resilient. This is key to make forests less vulnerable to fire risk, and it is an example of how, by working with nature and not against it, we can strengthen prevention and reduce disasters. In parallel, we work on preparedness. Under the Union Civil Protection Mechanism this year, we financed by more than 14 million euro to support the rescue fleet capacities with 10 Canadaires, 1 heavy helicopter and 2 air tractors. And we are planning to purchase 12 additional aircrafts under the RescEU. When national capacities are overwhelmed, the RescEU is ready to step in to provide additional support to confront disasters in Europe. And this year, for the very first time in the EU's history, the Commission is financing the prepositioning of 204 firefighters and ground vehicles from Bulgaria, Finland, France, Germany, Norway and Romania to Greece during July and August. The first teams already arrived last week. This is truly European solidarity in action and a perfect example of disasters preparedness. And we will not stop there. The Commission will strengthen its anticipation and foresight capacity. We will prepare disasters resilience goals taking into account different risks and potential disaster scenarios. And one of these scenarios assesses the needs to face heat waves. Honourable members, it is the EU's commitment, if a disaster strikes, to respond and to deliver assistance in the spirit of solidarity, both at home and abroad. Through the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, we pool our resources together and we provide a stronger and more coherent collective response wherever the needs are. And we continue providing our support also after a disaster through the European Union Solidarity Fund in coordination with other EU funds. Through the latest amendments of the EU's Solidarity Fund regulation, the threshold for the advances related to individual applications has been increased from 10 to maximum 25% of the amount of the financial contribution, or at the maximum amount of 100 million euro from the previous agreed sum of 30 million. This provision is a crucial improvement in facilitating rapid disbursement of EUSF assistance in the form of meaningful advance. The overall objective is to provide support in the aftermath of disaster, but also place the seed for future better resilience. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Προχωρούμε στον κύκλο των ομιλητών εκ μέρους των πολιτικών ομάδων για την ομάδα του Ευρωπαϊκού Λαϊκού Κόμματος. Το λόγο έχει για 2 λεπτά ο κύριος Tajani.
Political groups. On behalf of the EPP, Mr. Tajani, please, for 2 minutes.
Signor Vicepresidente della Commissione, grazie per aver ricordato anche la tragedia che ha colpito il mio paese, la Marmolada. Già prima di questa ondata di siccità, 52 milioni di europei vivevano in area sotto stress idrico per almeno un mese all'anno. Dal 2017 al 2019 una significativa siccità ha colpito la regione del Danubio, il Reno nel 2018. La siccità, oltre a creare danni disastrosi all'agricoltura e disagi alla popolazione, si ripercuote sul commercio e sul trasporto via fiume. Per l'Unione Europea e il Regno Unito le stime parlano di circa 9 miliardi di euro di danni alla produzione agricola, con picchi di 1,5 miliardi in Spagna e 1 miliardo e 400 milioni in Italia. Lo sa bene il Presidente della Regione Piemonte, che saluto, è una delle regioni più colpite nel mio paese dalla siccità. I fondi del recovery per approvvigionamento idrico, riduzione delle perdite nelle reti di distribuzione e rafforzamento dell'agrosistema vanno nella giusta direzione, come il regolamento per l'utilizzo delle acque depurate a fine agricolo. Ma questo non basta. L'Europa non può affrontare il problema solo con interventi di emergenza. Occorre essere incisivi, per questo chiediamo che la Commissione presenti un piano a lungo termine. Serve un grande piano invasi che abbia 2 scopi: garantire l'acqua per i cittadini e per le attività agricole e creare un grande progetto di energia pulita e rinnovabile attraverso il sistema dei pompaggi dei pannelli solari galleggianti. Una modifica alla direttiva 2001/18 per liberalizzare l'uso di nuove tecnologie di evoluzione assistita, svincolando dagli OGM. Le nuove biotecnologie agrarie possono assicurare una sperimentazione per avere piante più resistenti alla siccità e alla parassitosi. Serve una mappatura europea degli stretti idrografici per riequilibrare la disponibilità di acqua e soddisfare i bisogni più urgenti. Più investimenti in nuove tecnologie applicate all'agricoltura, seguendo il modello israeliano. Satelliti, droni e altre tecnologie di derivazione militare eliminano gli sprechi e determinano il fabbisogno idrico delle diverse tipologie di coltivazione e terreni. Concludo, per fare tutto ciò serve da subito più flessibilità nella gestione dei fondi del recovery, ma soprattutto serve il coraggio di avere un'unica politica fiscale europea a partire da un nuovo recovery fund.
Now I should like to give the floor on behalf of the Socialist and Democrats group, Mr.
Gracias, Presidente. Gracias, Vicepresidente. Bueno, yo creo que somos muy conscientes que las olas de calor, que las sequías van a suceder. La pregunta que es el problema es por qué todavía no estamos preparados. Entonces, fundamentalmente le quiero preguntar sobre desertificación, que tiene muchísima relación con lo que estamos hablando esta mañana. ¿Cuándo va a estar entre las prioridades de la Comisión Europea que se prepare y que se presente una estrategia de desertificación en la Unión Europea? Porque no la tenemos. En relación a la ley sobre la salud del suelo, va a estar también previsto que la desertificación se trate en esta ley, porque la tenemos anunciada, pero todavía no la conocemos. No somos parte de la Convención de las Naciones Unidas de lucha contra la desertificación. Sin embargo, en la estrategia del suelo se dijo que se le iba a pedir a los Estados miembros que se unieran. ¿Hay alguna noticia de esto, señor vicepresidente? En todo caso, necesitamos también saber qué impacto van a tener las sequías en nuestro medio ambiente, en nuestra salud, en la productividad agrícola, la que van a tener y la que ya están teniendo, porque, como digo, las olas de calor, las sequías, sabemos que van a suceder. El problema, la cuestión, señor vicepresidente de la Comisión Europea, ¿por qué todavía no estamos lo suficientemente preparados?
Thank you very much. Now, for the Renew Europe Group, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Stefanuta for 1 minute.
Domnule comisar, dragi colegi, unii oameni cred că banii sunt resursa cea mai importantă. Dar ce se întâmplă când o resursă precum apa dispare, precum un râu din Italia, domnului Tajani, din fața mea, dispare de pe planeta noastră? Apa este o resursă inepuizabilă și care nu poate fi cuantificată în valoarea ei. Europa abia mai respiră. Pădurile, plămânii Europei ard sub ochii noștri, ard de recoltă în Timiș, 16 incendii în ultimele 24 de ore. În Maramureș nu a mai plouat serios de 3 luni. Someșul scade zilnic cu 10 centimetri. În orașul Galați s-au format de câteva săptămâni insule de nisip în Dunăre. Insule, vă dați seama? Primarul comunei Dumbrăvița își îndeamnă cetățenii să folosească apa cu porții la o presiune cât mai redusă și doar în scopuri menajere. Chiar credeți că aportul fiecăruia, cât de mic, nu contează? Trebuie să ne oprim acum din a mai pompa carbon din atmosferă. Trebuie să oferim cea mai importantă resursă în continuare copiilor noștri. Vă mulțumesc.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Επόμενος ομιλητής για την ομάδα των Πρασίνων, ο κύριος Μπιτό, για 1 λεπτό. On behalf of the Greens, Mr. Bito, for 1 minute.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President.
Hier, l'Italie a décrété l'état d'urgence dans 5 régions à cause de la sécheresse. Plus d'une goutte d'eau ne coule dans la plaine du Pau. Plusieurs centrales hydroélectriques ont cessé leur activité. Plus de 30% de la production agricole est en danger et la production d'eau potable est coupée entre 23h et 6h du matin. Sans eau, la vie s'éteint, les Italiens et les Italiennes en font la triste expérience actuellement. Les sécheresses sont devenues la norme. Aucun pays de l'Union européenne et du monde ne sont épargnés. La privatisation des nappes phréatiques, l'artificialisation des sols, le saccage des zones humides, la surexploitation des ressources sont les principaux responsables. L'eau est un commun, il est aujourd'hui considéré comme un bien. En septembre prochain, une résolution sera votée sur la sécheresse. D'ici là, mes chers collègues, je vous invite à réfléchir sur la base de données objectives et des constats inquiétants à des solutions innovantes, créatives et efficaces qui ne seraient pas une nouvelle fuite en avant, qui préfèrent s'attaquer aux causes plutôt qu'aux conséquences et car il est plus qu'urgent d'agir pour sortir enfin sur l'eau de ce désert des partages.
Je vous remercie de Σας ευχαριστώ. Για την ομάδα ID, επόμενος ομιλητής ο κύριος Τσόκα. On behalf of the ID group, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Choka for 1.5 minutes.
Buongiorno Presidente, buongiorno Commissario. Io penso che abbiamo un dovere, quello di non condurre un'emergenza idrica in un'ora di chiacchiere, in un'ora, dalle mie parti si direbbe di bla bla bla. Servono azioni concrete, l'istituzione europea ha il dovere di dare risposte concrete, a meno che non si voglia realmente sostituire la nostra agricoltura, la nostra alimentazione con le eurofollie di farci mangiare scarafaggi, cimici, cavallette o addirittura cagnotti. Serve agire, a mio avviso, con 3 mosse. La prima, indennizzare immediatamente quelle aziende che rischiano di perdere il raccolto. Mettiamoci nei loro panni, ci sono aziende agricole che investono 200, 300, 400, 500 mila euro per poter avere il frutto di un raccolto. Dopo aver affrontato numerosi costi, oggi si trovano nel pericolo di non dover raccogliere i loro sacrifici. Notti insonne per lavoro, notti insonne per paura. Voi pensate che in Lombardia il 50% delle aziende agricole è a rischio chiusura. Quindi serve un indennizzo immediato, servono risorse anche per calmierare l'aumento dei prezzi del cibo che ci saranno, servono gli stanziamenti essenziali per realizzare quelle opere di impermeabilizzazione di bacini di riserve idriche. Pensate che i nostri ingegneri progettano nel mondo queste opere, le nostre aziende italiane realizzano nel mondo queste opere. Allora serve non continuare a sbagliare, altrimenti il settore agroalimentare farà la stessa fine del settore meccanico, del settore calzaturiero, del settore manifatturiero italiano. Allora prendiamo oggi stesso i 3 miliardi stanziati per le politiche sugli insetti e mettiamo quei 3 miliardi per le opere necessarie a dare risposte agli agricoltori, ai cittadini e alle opere infrastrutturali del Paese. Grazie.
Ευχαριστώ. Επόμενη ομιλήτρια για την ομάδα της αριστεράς, η κυρία Μίχελς, για 1,5 λεπτό.
Ms. Mikus for a minute and a half.
Herr Präsident, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, ja, auch bei mir zu Hause in Berlin-Brandenburg wüten verheerende Waldbrände. Aber das sind keine unerwarteten Naturkatastrophen, sondern direkte und schwerwiegende Folgen des menschengemachten Klimawandels. Wahrheit ist auch, eine Minderheit von Spekulanten zieht nach wie vor Profit aus der fossilen Energiekrise und aus dem Raubbau an Natur und deren Ressourcen. Und spätestens jetzt steht die Frage, wollen wir weiter zuschauen oder mutige Akteure werden? Die Rolle rückwärts, die gestern eine Mehrheit des Europäischen Parlaments beschlossen hat, nämlich Atomkraft und Gas für förderfähig und grün zu erklären, ist in meiner Sicht dabei ein fataler Fehler. Stattdessen müssen Profiteure endlich sinnvoll besteuert werden. Politik gegen den Klimawandel und für Klimaschutz ist nämlich kein Luxus, sondern schlichte Notwendigkeit. Vor allem Regionen und Kommunen brauchen dazu wirksame Unterstützung. Das muss Teil eines raschen sozialen EU-Krisenpakets und Teil langfristiger EU-Förderpolitik sein.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Ολοκληρώθηκε ο κατάλογος των εγγεγραμμένων ομιλητών. Επόμενη ομιλήτρια η κυρία Φεράρα.
Speeches on behalf of the political group. I'd like to give the floor now to Ms. Ferrara, who is not attached member
pochi giorni fa, a causa delle alte temperature, un distacco enorme di ghiaccio ha causato la morte di diverse persone sulle montagne della Marmolada in Italia. E inoltre il Consiglio dei Ministri italiano ha deliberato lo stato di emergenza per siccità per 5 giorni. A livello globale dal 2000 i fenomeni di siccità per numero e durata sono aumentati del 29%. Se questo trend continuerà, diversi studi sostengono che entro il 2030 700 milioni di persone rischieranno di essere sfollate a causa della siccità ed entro il 2050 il 75% della popolazione mondiale si ritroverebbe ad essere colpito da siccità. È allora fondamentale dirigere i nostri sforzi e le nostre risorse verso azioni ecosostenibili, riduzione delle emissioni, pratiche agricole che sprechino meno acqua e più in generale verso azioni di tutela del territorio in linea con le nuove condizioni climatiche. La Terra non lancia più timidi allarmi, siamo giunti più velocemente del previsto ad un punto critico. Viviamo in maniera più sostenibile le nostre vite perché lo dobbiamo alle generazioni presenti e a quelle future. Grazie.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Επόμενος ομιλητής για 1,5 λεπτό, κύριος Ντόρφμαν.
Mr. Dorfman now for a minute and a half.
Grazie Presidente, colleghi e colleghi. La siccità in alcune zone del bacino mediterraneo, soprattutto anche in Italia, colpisce fortemente l'agricoltura. Questo non è solo un problema per gli agricoltori, ne risentono purtroppo anche i consumatori. La sicurezza alimentare in Europa è già a rischio a causa della guerra in Ucraina, i prezzi alimentari aumentano da mesi ed è sempre più chiaro che la raccolta nell'Unione Europea in quest'anno, soprattutto nelle zone mediterranee, sarà più bassa, creando ulteriori
real problem in productivity in the Mediterranean basin in particular, and that is why it is absolutely crucial that we trigger a plan to try and mitigate this phenomenon. We need to try and use systems to
L'agricoltura deve imparare però
well
anche a risparmiare acqua. Dobbiamo investire nella ricerca per trovare sistemi di utilizzo efficiente dell'acqua disponibile. L'agricoltura di precisione, sensori, sistemi satellitari possono dare un contributo importante in questo senso. Avremo poi sempre più bisogno di piante più resistenti alla siccità. Il miglioramento genetico, anche l'utilizzo di nuove biotecnologie è più necessario che mai. Dobbiamo finalmente legiferare anche in questo Parlamento per rendere applicabili queste tecnologie in Europa. Dobbiamo poi sfruttare meglio le opportunità della politica agricola. Proprio in queste settimane gli Stati membri terminano il loro lavoro sui piani strategici della PAC. Dobbiamo offrire agli agricoltori sistemi efficienti per assicurarsi contro le avversità atmosferiche che purtroppo sono in aumento. Negli ultimi anni abbiamo lavorato e elaborato a sistemi innovativi come anche i fondi mutualistici che adesso devono trovare applicazione. E solo una combinazione di tutti questi elementi possono portare a una gestione sensibile di questi fenomeni nel futuro.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Επόμενη ομιλήτρια για ένα λεπτό, η κυρία Σέρντες.
Now for 1 minute, Ms. Serdis, please. Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, the European Union has experienced a drought that has an impact on a third of the continent, and today we can see that the situation is drastic in Portugal. According to the Portuguese Institute for Sea and Atmosphere, some 66% of the territory is in extreme drought and 33% in severe drought. Therefore, we need the following measures: monitoring and prevention with the support of the European Drought Observatory. We also need assessment plans for the territory to better understand the most vulnerable places as well as extreme climate phenomena and the best possible measures to address those. We also need mitigation measures for drought risk as well as heat wave risk. Unfortunately, we are going to continue to feel the impact of climate change. We're going to have to learn to live with them, but continue also to work to mitigate them and to protect the health of our citizens and our planet. Thank you.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Επόμενη ομιλήτρια για ένα λεπτό, η κυρία
Now I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Rodriguez Ramos for 1 minute.
Gracias, presidente. En la primera ola de calor que hemos vivido entre el 11 y 19 de junio, hemos sufrido en mi región, en Zamora, en la Sierra de la Culebra, uno de los incendios más devastadores de España. Más de 24.000 hectáreas abrasadas. Toda la estructura económica de esta zona destruida. En los años 90 decíamos que los grandes incendios eran los que asolaban más de 500 hectáreas. Hoy, más de 24.000.
As I say,
Podemos
in the past,
prever
covering
por las
about
olas de
15,000
calor
hectares, but over
estos incendios.
24,000, as I say,
Pero
this year.
tenemos que cambiar
So we've got
los
heat
medios de
waves, we've
luchar
got
contra
forest
ellos.
fires, and we've got
No
now
podemos
to
abordar
put in
los
place measures
retos
to
de estos
tackle
incendios de
both,
esta generación
because
con
we
medios del pasado.
cannot
Por eso le pido,
tackling
comisario, que
this
procedamos a
generation
la
of heat
revisión,
waves
actualización,
with the
modificación
methods of the
del plan
past,
de
and that is
protección
why we
civil
need
ante
to
emergencias por
amend
incendios
our civil
forestales.
protection
Que
plan
seamos capaces
to
de
tackle
mantener
forest
durante
fires,
todo el
and
año
we
activas
need to
los servicios de extinción. Porque estos
Alert
grandes
throughout the
incendios ya
year.
no se
Our
apagan,
emergency
solo
services
podemos
need to be active throughout the year because these fires never
hace
go
falta
out. And the only thing we can do,
para las
therefore,
catástrofes,
is
pero nuestra
take action to
obligación
prevent
no es
them. So we
declararlas,
need
sino
solidarity
prevenirlas.
in the face of such catastrophes, but all we can do is work to prevent them.
Επόμενη στην ομιλία είναι ο κύριος Χόλμπραν για ένα λεπτό.
Now, Mr. Holmgren for 1 minute.
Tack så mycket, herr ordförande.
Thank you very much,
Är det någonting vi kan vara
If
helt
there's something
säkra
we
på
can be
när det
completely
gäller
certain
globala
about
uppvärmningen
concerning
är att
global warming
risken för
is the
svåra
risk
värmeböljor ökar. De blir
serious heat
fler,
waves are
de blir
increasing.
värre och med det
We're
också
going to have more, they're going to be worse. And with those results, we're going to see forest fires, high temperatures, bad harvests.
Det finns antagligen inget annat sammanhang
there's probably
där
no
varje
other connection
tiondelsgrad
that
kommer bli
you
så
could
tydlig.
see with just a tenth of an increase of a degree. And you have, of course, to make some climate adjustment. Of course, you have to be prepared. But the most important thing to do is stop global warming. We have to take this more seriously. This is all countries within Europe and all sectors, and also here in the Parliament, all the political groups as well. You have to take your responsibility. You have to do what you can do. Together, we can reduce the risks and the impacts of global warming. Thank you.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Το λόγο τώρα έχει η κυρία Τοβαλιέρη για 1,5 λεπτό.
Ms. Tovaglieri for a minute and a half.
Grazie Presidente, colleghi, la scarsità d'acqua sta mettendo in ginocchio tutti i nostri territori, provocando danni ingenti ad un'economia già in affanno. Solo in Lombardia si lamentano già perdite per 500 milioni di euro e anche a causa dei rincari dell'energia le aziende del settore avranno maggiori oneri nella gestione dei raccolti e nella produzione di frutta che inevitabilmente si ribalteranno sui consumatori. Tuttavia questa situazione drammatica era ampiamente prevedibile, ma l'Europa non è corsa ai ripari per tempo. Anziché ascoltare gli allarmi lanciati per anni dal mondo agricolo, la Commissione europea ha preferito consultarsi con Greta Thunberg, accogliendola proprio in quest'Aula con tutti gli onori di un capo di Stato. Quando poi sarebbe stato necessario finanziare infrastrutture e tecnologie per il risparmio idrico, quest'Aula era impegnata nel dibattere dei diritti dei Rom e della misura delle vongole. E infine, quando ci si è decisi finalmente a prendere provvedimenti per il clima, l'Europa si è posto obiettivi ideologici e irrealistici che finalmente ieri in quest'Aula, anche grazie al voto della Lega, sono stati rimessi in discussione. È il momento che l'Europa cambi rotta. Contro la siccità occorrono misure di sostegno eccezionali nei territori più colpiti, ma soprattutto una maggiore apertura verso fonti energetiche sostenibili come idrogeno e nucleare per salvaguardare la nostra autonomia strategica e per non contribuire all'espansione economica della Cina, che già oggi è la più grande produttrice di gas serra di tutto il pianeta.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Villanueva Ruiz per minute.
La falta de agua golpea a sectores como la agricultura, como la ganadería, el turismo en diversos puntos de España. El pasado mes de junio se superaron durante varios días los 40 grados, algo insólito en Navarra, en nuestra tierra. Y lo más preocupante es que los fenómenos climáticos extremos serán cada vez más frecuentes. Provocan además que la naturaleza tenga menos recursos para hacer frente a los incendios y que estos se extiendan a gran velocidad, tal y como ocurrió carbonizando casi 15.000 hectáreas en mi tierra y obligando el desalojo de 9.000 personas, y está ocurriendo en múltiples lugares. La adaptación y la mitigación del cambio climático son dos asignaturas pendientes y desde luego no avanzamos considerando el gas y nuclear como energías verdes. Por un lado, debemos orientar nuestra acción política a frenar la emergencia climática y por otro, adaptar en la medida de lo posible nuestros espacios de vida a temperaturas y fenómenos extremos. En el caso de la sequía y del calor, las consecuencias son muy tangibles e inmediatas y desde luego ponen en peligro nuestra salud y la de nuestro entorno. Lo más duro no es que estamos en el verano más caluroso de nuestra historia. Lo más duro es que estamos ante el verano más frío del resto de nuestra historia. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Amaro for 1 minute, please.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Presidente.
Thank you very much, President.
Caras e caros colegas, Sr. Vice-Presidente da
Dear
Comissão.
colleagues, Vice President of the
Vivemos
Commission.
atualmente, de facto, a pior
Currently,
seca
we
desde
are
que há registros
experiencing
em
the
algumas
worst
regiões
drought
da Europa.
on record in some regions in Europe and specifically in the south
estudo
of Europe.
recentemente publicado aponta para
A
uma
recently
frequência de
published
invernos
study
secos na
has
Península
pointed
Ibérica
to the fact that
de em cada 4 anos.
there has been an uptick
Portugal,
in the frequency
são
of
claros
dry
os efeitos
winters
das
in
alterações
the
climáticas.
Iberian Peninsula,
A
1 in every
precipitação
4
média
years.
anual
In Portugal,
reduziu
we can see
20
this clearly.
milímetros por década.
And in fact,
average participation has gone down by 20 millimeters per decade. And there has been an increase in heat waves. This has an enormous impact on wildflowers, and in fact, we have some 98.5% of our territory is in extreme and severe drought. Therefore, Commissioner, we need structural strategies. The EU has to think about a European strategy to increase our approach to surface water and storage thereof. A strategy that also means that member states can finance, outside of the CAP, an approach to modernizing our existing approaches and infrastructure for example, dams, as well as the links. Now, nature and climate is requiring this of us right now. Thank you very much. Thank you. For 1 minute, I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Benefei.
Grazie Presidente, la siccità uccide. Stiamo ancora cercando i dispersi nel crollo del Serracco della Marmolada, avvenuto pochi giorni fa, dopo vittime e feriti. Una tragedia immane che ci dice che non c'è più tempo. Anche la destra è costretta ad ammettere, dopo anni di negazionismo, che il cambiamento climatico oggi è davanti ai nostri occhi, è innegabile. È un fenomeno che porta alla rapida sparizione dei ghiacciai, a una siccità terribile, una manifestazione macroscopica di qualcosa che avviene intorno a noi. Dopo questa pesantissima ondata di calore vediamo il rischio per una siccità la peggiore degli ultimi decenni, che prosciuga fiumi e riserve d'acqua, con danni gravissimi per l'ambiente, l'agricoltura e i cittadini. Lo vediamo in Italia, lo vediamo in Europa. Cosa stiamo aspettando ancora a cambiare radicalmente i nostri sistemi economici? Cosa deve ancora accadere per far aprire gli occhi a tutte e tutti? Lavoriamo insieme perché davvero non c'è più tempo.
We need to work together on this. There's no time to be lost. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Häusling, for 1 minute.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, die Klimakrise kommt nicht irgendwann. Die Klimakrise ist da. Und wir sehen das jetzt, was passiert bei 1,5 Grad Erwärmung. Was soll eigentlich passieren, wenn wir mal in Richtung 2 oder noch mehr Grad Erwärmung kommen? Jetzt schon brennt dieser Planet. Nicht nur Krise in Südeuropa, auch mitten in Deutschland brennen Wälder. Noch viel schlimmer sind die Auswirkungen der Klimakrise in Nordafrika, wo Menschen tatsächlich verhungern und nicht wissen, was sie morgen essen. Was ziehen wir eigentlich für Schlüsse daraus? Wir haben gestern einen fatalen Beschluss gefasst. Wir müssen endlich CO2 begrenzen. Das ist die Antwort, nicht Gentechnik oder 12 Löschflugzeuge. Da müssen wir dran arbeiten. Wir brauchen einen anderen Umgang mit Agrarsystemen. Wir brauchen einen anderen Umgang mit Wasser. Und wir müssen uns auch klar machen, dass nicht nur Landwirtschaft betroffen ist, sondern auch Wälder in Europa verschwinden, die ja auch dazu beitragen, dass der Klimawandel sich verschärft. Ich denke, wir müssen jetzt ernsthaft darüber nachdenken, uns Gedanken zu machen, passen wir die Agrarpolitik an, passen wir unseren Umgang mit Wasser an und, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, lassen Sie uns endlich ernsthaft an der Senkung von CO2 arbeiten. Das ist die einzige Antwort.
Thank you. Now for 1 minute, Mr. Montreanu.
Domnule președinte, domnule comisar, în prezent 13 state membre sunt afectate de decertificare. Acest fenomen este însă în continuă extindere în întreaga Europa. În 2018, Curtea de Conturi Europeană a concluzionat că măsurile luate pentru combaterea decertificării sunt lipsite de coerență. Parlamentul European mi-a susținut în decembrie 2020 un amendament depus pe o rezoluție a Comisiei ENVI, prin care am solicitat Comisiei Europene să prezinte o strategie clară pentru combaterea deșertificării, precum și alocarea fondurilor necesare pentru gestionarea acestui fenomen în toate regiunile afectate. Nu vom putea atinge acest obiectiv fără fonduri europene dedicate combaterii deșertificării și refacerii terenurilor, fără investiții serioase în sistemele de irigații și în dezvoltarea sistemelor sistemelor de reutilizare a apelor uzate. În continuare, solicit Comisiei Europene stabilirea unui calendar ambițios de acțiuni și monitorizarea progreselor de etapă pentru a ne asigura că nicio regiune nu este lăsată în urmă.
To use the various funds and steps to make sure that no one is left behind. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Vitanov for 1 minute.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. A few days ago, 9 people died after a glacier fell in the Italian Alps. Extremely high temperatures led to droughts we haven't seen for decades. Temperatures in Sicily were at 57 degrees. Water shortages in Italy, 52 wildfires in Greece alone over the last 24 hours. What does it take to realize that we are at the threshold of an apocalypse that we brought about? Overconsumption, overuse of resources proved lethal. Didn't we realize that we strove for more which led to our children having less? Disaster is at our door. Emergency measures are a must. Solidarity is our only way out. We have to use less resources in order to have resources for the future. Only radical changes can make the future possible. Thank you.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Επόμενη ομιλήτρια, η κυρία Σαντέρ, για 1 λεπτό.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Commissaire, chers collègues. La sécheresse devient récurrente au fil des années et soulève 2 enjeux essentiels. Le premier est la question de la gestion de l'eau sur nos territoires et la nécessité de concilier tous les usages de cette ressource vitale pour la consommation humaine, mais aussi pour les cultures, pour l'élevage, pour l'industrie et pour l'énergie. Le deuxième enjeu est celui de la sécurité alimentaire, qui est l'affaire de tous. Voilà pourquoi il nous faut très vite des mesures exceptionnelles d'accompagnement du monde agricole pour lui permettre de produire. Pour cela, nous devons travailler au soutien et à plus de flexibilité pour les systèmes d'irrigation. Nous devons réfléchir à la question du stockage de l'eau. Il nous faut plus de recherche et d'innovation pour mieux gérer cette ressource qu'est l'eau. Enfin, je voudrais aussi rappeler que nous devrions retravailler la question du déclenchement de l'outil de gestion des risques, qui peut venir en accompagnement en cas de catastrophe. Je crois que le monde agricole et le monde sylvicole aujourd'hui ont besoin d'un soutien clair et à très court terme de la part de notre Assemblée.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Επόμενη ομιλήτρια, κυρία Μόρτλερ, για 1 λεπτό.
Now, Mr. Mortler, for 1 minute.
Herr Präsident, liebe Kollegen, Herr Kommissar. Nicht die Gesamtniederschlagsmenge eines Jahres pro Quadratmeter ist alleine entscheidend. Regenwasser muss zur richtigen Jahreszeit vom Himmel fallen. In Deutschland wird noch zu 99% Regenwasser in der Landwirtschaft genutzt, also grünes Wasser. Extremwetterereignisse nehmen aber zu, ob Extremniederschläge oder Dürren, wie aktuell in Italien und weiten Teilen Europas. Darauf brauchen wir gute und vor allem schnelle
seeing in southern Europe. So we need good and rapid response. Sustainable water management and sustainable irrigation is essential. So blue water has an important job, and water-saving technology, more cooperation among enterprises, more advice and consulting. This all is going to improve the water management. You don't have to use ideology in this case. We all have to work hand in hand, and for that reason, I support colleagues, your demands. Thank you.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Ολοκληρώθηκε ο κατάλογος των εγγεγραμμένων ομιλητών. Προχωρούμε στη διαδικασία του Catch the Eye. Έχω δεχτεί 9 αιτήματα. Θα τα κάνω και τα 9 αποδεκτά για 2 λόγους. Πρώτος είναι ότι δεν χάσαμε χρόνο με διαδικασίες μπλε κάρτα στο μεταξύ και πάμε καλά με το χρόνο. Και ο δεύτερος λόγος είναι ότι είναι εξαιρετικά σημαντικό το θέμα που συζητούμε. Το λόγο έχει ο κύριος Ντενέο για 1 λεπτό. Παρακαλώ να τηρείτε το χρόνο.
Grazie Presidente.
Signor Commissario, la siccità non è un problema di alcuni e non commettiamo l'errore di come quando 2 anni fa, in presenza dei primi casi Covid, qualcuno ha pensato che fosse il problema di alcuni Stati. La siccità è un problema di tutta l'Europa e non solo. Per questo abbiamo bisogno di un approccio comune europeo e strutturato con azioni concrete. È necessario modernizzare e realizzare nuove infrastrutture italiane ed europee per capire in che modo rendere disponibili le riserve d'acqua anche con un sistema di solidarietà europea. L'Europa ha investito molto sia in ricerca spaziale e innovazione, ma le tecnologie e i dati possono e devono essere meglio utilizzati per garantire un uso appropriato e responsabile di una risorsa idrica che a quanto pare non è inesauribile. L'emergenza siccità coincide con la recente decisione della Commissione di ridurre i fitofarmaci. Per compensare queste misure è necessaria una normativa europea per l'utilizzo delle tecnologie di evoluzione assistita, diversa dagli OGM, per avere colture più resistenti e resilienti ai nuovi agenti patogeni e alle sempre più frequenti siccità. L'agricoltura europea sta attraversando una fase delicata, ma se vogliamo garantire la sua transizione verde, dobbiamo preoccuparci ora di come evitare un'ormai certa emergenza idraulica, altrimenti avremo il collasso e la dipendenza alimentare dai paesi terzi.
Thank you very much. Mr. Semper, for 1 minute.
Gracias, presidente. Tenemos que ir más allá y pensar que las olas de calor no son algo ya puntual o pasajero. Tenemos que poner el foco en aquellos lugares del sur de Europa donde cada año experimentamos veranos más largos con temperaturas prolongadas de 35 grados durante todos los días del verano. Esto se traduce en una emergencia social silenciosa que genera quizás menos alarma que los grandes incendios que vemos en la televisión, pero que tiene consecuencias igual de graves. Una pobreza energética tan severa como la del invierno en los países fríos. Les pido que se pongan en la piel de un niño o de unos niños del sur de Europa que viven a estas temperaturas y van a un colegio que no está refrigerado, que no está adaptado al calor extremo. ¿Cómo se puede estudiar así? Pasamos la mayor parte de nuestra vida en edificios que no están adaptados a este cambio climático y a estas temperaturas extremas. Comisario, tenemos que adaptar nuestra política de cohesión y nuestros fondos de solidaridad para conseguir que nuestros edificios y nuestros entornos urbanos sean más eficientes y adaptados al calor. Tenemos que reducir el sufrimiento de estas familias que día a día soportan temperaturas extremas durante meses.
Thank you very much. Mr. Barenata, for 1 minute.
Lo vivido en Navarra desde el 15 hasta el 19 de junio ha sido una situación crítica, absolutamente excepcional y sin precedentes. La situación meteorológica en torno a 40 grados durante días, tormentas eléctricas y la sequedad de la tierra con más de 50 días sin lluvias han provocado varios incendios con efectos devastadores. Afortunadamente no ha habido daños personales de gravedad y la afección en núcleos urbanos ha sido mínima, pero han ardido unas 15.000 hectáreas en diversas zonas de Navarra, dejando graves daños en la masa forestal, fauna y flora, un desastre en términos medioambientales que el Gobierno de Navarra ya ha prometido restaurar con celeridad. Y para ello ya se ha iniciado la tramitación de la declaración de zona de daños de protección civil ante el Gobierno estatal. Se están trabajando también las ayudas posibles de fondos europeos, la FFSUE, y va a ser necesaria una inversión muy importante para la reforestación y apoyar a los agricultores y explotaciones agrarias perjudicados. Y para eso es necesario que se permita el acceso a las ayudas del Fondo de Solidaridad de la Unión Europea a quienes han sufrido este tipo de desastres naturales y que probablemente no entran en los mínimos exigibles de daños cuantificados, pero que para una economía regional como la Navarra son devastadores y de complicada resolución económica. Atiendan pues esta situación y reduzcan los umbrales de acceso al Fondo de Solidaridad para que este mecanismo de emergencia cumpla con el objetivo para el que fue creado. Muchas gracias.
The objective that it was created to meet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Borgovic, for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Vidimo, so pogosti vročinski udari, suše, vse pogostejši, predvsem v južnem delu Evrope, kamor sodi tudi moja država Slovenija, v tem jugovzhodu. In kmetijstvo in gozdarstvo sta zagotovo največji žrtvi tega pojava. Zato se strinjam s kolegi, ki poudarjajo, kako pomembno je, da na eni strani ukrepimo sisteme civilne zaščite, da smo pripravljeni tudi na gozdne požare, da jih čim prej omejimo. Na področju kmetijstva pa je zagotovo zelo pomembno pravilno upravljanje z vodami. Sam prihajam iz območja, kjer smo združili na eni strani tako izgradnjo hidroelektrarne kot namakanje, ki ima prednost pred energetsko izrabo in na ta način poskušamo reševati te probleme. Pri namakanju je vsekakor potrebna sodobna tehnologija z nizko porabo vode in po drugi strani tudi primerni kolobarji, pa tudi genske tehnike, s katerimi pridobimo rastline, ki so odpornejše na sušo.
Mulțumesc, domnule președinte, domnule comisar. Discutăm, de fapt, despre un subiect care ține de viața oamenilor. Caniculă, secetă, incendii. În țara mea, în județul în care trăiesc, au ars lanurile de grâu, nu ard numai pădurile, nu ard grânele. Ce fac acei fermieri? Au credite la bancă. Costurile creditele la bancă au crescut, cel puțin în țara mea. Rămân cu nimic. Avem sistem de supraveghere, avem sistem de mecanism de protecție civilă, avem și fond de solidaritate. Problema e cum facem să ajungă cât mai repede acești bani la oamenii afectați. Și da, acum tratăm efectele. Trebuie să mergem și la cauze concomitente. Dar acum arde și trebuie să stingem acest foc, domnule comisar. Așadar, vă cer în numele fermierilor din România, în numele cetățenilor din România care nu mai au apă de luni de zile în zone întregi, nu au plouat și este pământul pur și simplu crăpat și oamenii beau apa cu porția. Așadar, trebuie să intervenim de urgență, sigur, în colaborare cu guvernele statelor membre. Dar avem nevoie de urgență acum să intervenim. Mulțumesc.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Paulus, for 1 minute.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident. Liebe Kolleginnen, liebe Kollegen, vor wenigen Tagen wurde eine Studie veröffentlicht, dass die derzeitige Hitzewelle im Süden, Südwesten, Südosten Europas und die damit verbundene Dürre in Zukunft noch viel häufiger auftreten werden. Das bedeutet, wir müssen nicht nur sehr viel schneller werden beim Klimaschutz, wir müssen gleichzeitig die Anpassung an die veränderten Bedingungen vorantreiben. Diese gigantische Aufgabe müssen wir zusammen angehen. Und ich meine, an erster Stelle muss das Eindämmen der Verschwendung stehen. Es kann doch nicht sein, dass wir Grundwasserressourcen, die bereits jetzt in einem Maße genutzt werden, wie sie sich eben nicht wieder auffüllen, durch Sprühen bei strahlendem Wetter über weite Felder einfach weiter übernutzen. Das heißt, wir müssen sehr viel klüger mit diesen begrenzten Ressourcen umgehen und selbstverständlich bleibt es nicht aus, dass wir sehr viel schneller beim Aufbau der erneuerbaren Energien, bei der Energieeffizienz an die Wurzeln
with improving renewable energy, energy efficiency. We have to really address this at its roots. Thank you. Mr. Pereira, for 1 minute.
Obrigada, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Now, we've had many debates on extreme weather events, drought, and the impact on farming, fishing, and other economic activities. In my country, in Portugal, the country is experiencing extreme and severe drought, and that could also lead to wildfires. Now, we always have to go back to the fact that there are mitigation measures, but they are not enough. We need prevention measures that will build capacity in our use of water, adapting our productive approaches to farming, and making sure that we have enough water for human consumption, public health, safeguarding as well our farming yields as well as our water resources. Tangible measures to store water are becoming essential so that we can make sure that we will be able to uphold this access. But that means we're going to need to rally funds for the purposes of making sure that we have enough water for families and farming and protecting the rural environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Regina, for 1 minute.
Grazie Presidente, Commissario.
Thank you very much, President.
Dobbiamo fare in modo che la siccità non prosciughi anche i bilanci e la competitività delle nostre aziende agricole, settore nevralgico per l'economia non solo italiana. Ciò potrà avvenire solo con il ruolo determinante dell'Europa, chiamata a varare soluzioni strutturali per garantire l'autosufficienza alimentare a livello comunitario. Il cambiamento climatico e la conseguente aridità degli ultimi anni non è solo un problema italiano, ma coinvolge altri paesi europei e per questo deve essere risolto con un'azione congiunta da parte dell'Unione. Ci domandiamo quindi quali le misure che si intendono adottare in Europa per affrontare il grave problema della siccità sia dal punto di vista economico che strutturale. Grazie.
Thank you very much. Dali for 1 minute.
The translator was slow there. Thanks very much, President. It is really, truly terrifying to see these record heat waves, with much of Europe nearing 40 degrees and devastating consequences in Italy and Spain in particular. Major rivers drying up, water rationing becoming the new normal. But the consequences will be even more magnified in the global south, with millions and millions suffering destructive wildfires, prolonged drought and crop failures. But for me, the most horrific thing is our Western leaders' total immobility in the face of this ever-nearing, burning, destructive crisis caused by climate change. And we got a glimpse of that yesterday in the shameful decision of the Parliament to refuse to support the taxonomy objection in relation to nuclear and gas. We welcome the coal burning again, LNG and the so-called fig leaf of combating Putin. But these decisions will have consequences. There's no doubt the victims and the farmers need urgent support on this. We need sustainability, but we have to tackle also the root cause.
Thank you very much. So that completes the Catch the Eye procedure, and now on behalf of the Commissioner, Commissioner Šefčovič.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I really would like to appreciate this very important, passionate and rightly so debate on such important issues like recent heat waves, drought and forest fires. And I totally agree with Mr. Di Meo that this is not a problem for a few, but it's a problem for all Europeans. And I think that I also have to say that I'm in full agreement with Mr. Stefanuta, Mr. Vito, Mr. Rosempre, Mr. Benifei and many others who've been rightly triggering the alarm bells that, unfortunately, with the climate change through which we are going right now and through which we'll be going in the next years and decades, the weather events are likely to happen more frequently in the future than in the past. And therefore, your call for attaching even more crucial importance of working together along the whole cycle of risk management, from prevention to preparedness, to work more on response, to build more resilience in our systems are absolutely correct. And I can tell you that we'll be working with you on all of them. I think that we already learned from the past and we developed the right tools and policies to address the broad spectrum of the risks, and we also have a funding which can help. But you're absolutely correct as well that if you look at it through the experience of the last months, last years, we need to be able constantly reviewing, adjusting and adapting our policies. And therefore, the call of Madam Rodriguez Ramos to work on disasters resilience goals is absolutely correct. We are already working on that, and I think that here again we'll be working with you and with our member states how to make sure that we would proceed with better climate adaptation, with mitigation investments, especially in the most exposed regions, which we saw represented by the members of the European Parliament who intervened this morning, and what we can do better through cohesion funding, and base our next steps not only on the past experience but also on strengthened foresight and anticipation. Mr. Di Meo, Mr. Borena Arza, Madame Grappini, been asking what can we do more on top of the better use of Solidarity Fund, which I described in my introductory remarks. We beefed up, we accelerated. What kind of other compensatory measures could be put in place? The quick feedback I can give you is that we are talking with our member states on the possibility which they have, and they can compensate farmers under the rural development programs, and they can ask to modify their national programs as relevant, and this is already happening with several EU member states. All of you make a strong reference to the climate change and to the need to be very ambitious in implementation of the European Green Deal. And I would like to reassure you that for us, part of the Green Deal is not only reducing CO2 emissions. This is also part and parcel of our strategy, how to beef up our biodiversity strategy. We just simply see if we will not restore biodiversity, the nature will simply push us hard to remind us that simply there are basic law of physics, basic law how the Earth is functioning, and we shouldn't interfere with this natural cycle of events. Therefore, just recently we presented a nature protection package to make sure that our efforts are geared to restore and protect the ecosystems. And I know that this is of a big interest to the honourable members of this House, and we are ready to work with you to further improve our approach and to make sure that we will deliver on this very important strategy. Madame Luna and Mr. Montreanu been highlighting the danger of potential desertification, not only in Europe, but in the world. And therefore, we just presented soil strategy for 2030, and in this strategy, we have actions to not only monitor the desertification in the EU, but we want also to step up with concrete actions both at home and globally. And coming back to the foresight, which, as you know, is part of my portfolio, again, the honourable member has been right. There is very clear foresight that if the climate change will continue at the pace as it is right now, in a few decades we might have 10% less of arable land globally, which of course would have very severe consequences, especially for the development countries. If it comes to the emergencies, to the preparedness, to the droughts, we have the ways how to respond in the short-term emergency measures through our UCPM mechanisms and through our recently refurbished and upgraded EU-wide yearly warning systems. We already are working with some of our member states who already adopted drought management plans for vulnerable rivers. This is the response to Mr. Bokovic, and probably we have to learn from that experience how to do it for all relevant member states where they face this very important challenge. But this is obviously not enough, and in the long run, what we need to do is to scale up better water use in the agriculture. We have to look at sustainable soil management and the vegetation cover, and we have to invest, as it was said by many, drought-resistant crops and restored damaged areas. And if you allow me to conclude, I would like to appreciate the way how Mr. Tajani, Mr. Dorfman, Mr. Sander, Madame Luna highlighted that what we are discussing here today is just not a narrow issue, that it has very strong horizontal impact on different policies we are discussing together. This is not only issue of climate change, emergency measures, or being better prepared for the future challenges. It has to do a lot with our common agriculture policy. It has to do a lot with the modern precision farming, with using new technologies like drones, satellites, for better anticipation, prediction, but also for using these new technologies in this very important sector. And it has to do a lot with using our funds under the research and innovation to make sure that we will deploy the best possible technologies, best approaches, and the best crops for the use in the agriculture. To conclude, honourable members, I would like to say that I hear you loud and clear that you would like us to act swifter, faster, closer with you, closer with member states, closer with the regions under pressure, and that we are ready to do so, and we'll be discussing this with you, with the member states, to make sure that we'll be permanently upgrading our policy responses to this very important challenge. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you very much, honourable members, for this very important discussion. Thank you.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Η συζήτηση έληξε. Η ψηφοφορία θα διεξαχθεί στην επόμενη περίοδο συνόδου. Το επόμενο σημείο στην ημερήσια διάταξη είναι η Gate σχετικά με τα βιώσιμα αεροπορικά καύσιμα, πρωτοβουλία Refuel
Sustainable Aviation Fuels, Refuel EU Aviation Initiative.
Δίνω ευθύς αμέσως το λόγο στον κύριο Γκέιτ για 4 λεπτά.
I should like to give the floor immediately to Mr. Gade.
Dear colleagues, today the Parliament is taking the first step to decarbonize the sector, which is probably the most difficult one to decarbonize. The election in 2019 was, for many people, a climate election. So I'm proud that today we're showing Europeans that it wasn't just empty words when we promised climate action. In 2017, emissions from aviation represented 3.8% of the EU's total emissions, and aviation's portion of emissions is expected to increase significantly if we don't take action. So it's necessary that we make demands of our airlines, but everyone has to participate. Those who make the fuels, the airports, those who make the airplanes, member states, passengers. If we don't act, we only have two alternatives. We either have to stop flying or we have to drop our climate goals. And of course, we don't want to go in those directions. We agree that European aviation should be sustainable and green. We also agree that's going to be a challenge. So let me praise the Commission for the good proposal. The approach is wise, it's simple, and it'll work. By making these demands of the fuel producers and to drop in the green fuel, we're going to ensure that we have less emissions. And with the refuel aviation, the EU is going to lead the way in the green transition. With this proposal, we can demonstrate to the rest of the world how aviation can become green. In spite of the good approach in the Commission's proposal, we don't think it was ambitious enough. So that's why I'm proud to have led the negotiations in the Parliament to have a much more ambitious approach. Firstly, we propose that the drop-in requirement should increase significantly. In other words, we want to have more green fuel in the planes than the Commission proposed. We also want to have a higher requirement for having synthetic fuels used from 100% sustainable sources. These so-called e-fuels are the future, and we have to stimulate their rolling out and upscaling as fast as possible. These green fuels are much more expensive than the conventional ones, so to create incentives, we have and have competition, we have to have these additional expenses compensated by ETS. And that would also mean that airlines won't be stopping at intermediate stops outside the EU in order to refuel. In addition, we have to have better control, better transparency in order to address the emissions that aren't just CO2. As a rapporteur, I had to gather all the different wings, and it wasn't easy. They're national, they're political considerations, ideological, economic interests, they had to be addressed. And I'm clear that of the fact that not everyone is satisfied. I hope, however, that my colleagues and the stakeholders feel that I have listened and I've tried to be accessible as a rapporteur. And I would like to thank everyone who contributed, also my own political group, Renew. 2 committees have given opinions. I'd like to thank my colleagues in those committees. I've tried as far as possible to include your points of view, and I have to note with satisfaction that there haven't been any amendments made by either ITRA or ENVI. And before we negotiate with the Council, I look forward to working with the Presidency, and I really hope that we can get an ambitious result. Thank you very much. And I look forward to today's discussion.
Σας ευχαριστώ για την Επιτροπή Περιβάλλοντος, Δημόσιας Υγείας και Ασφάλειας Τροφίμων. Το λόγο έχει για 1 λεπτό
for the ENVI Committee. I'd like to give the floor to Mr. González Casares for 1 minute.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, President. There's one thing that we all agree on. Transport is one of the sectors that has reduced its emissions the least, and aviation is one of the sectors that we are focusing on because of technological issues. It's extremely difficult to decarbonize aviation. That is why this proposal is so incredibly needed to make progress in reducing emissions in the sector. And that is precisely what we need to do. We need to do this to make sure that the fuel that we are using is consistent with the climate objectives that we have here in this Parliament and in the Fit for 55 package. That is why we need to look to the future for sustainable fuels and synthetic fuels that are non-biological fuels. Little by little, we are going to be closing the door to those fuels that are not sustainable. That is why we hoped at the European Parliament to improve some of the elements of the proposal that the Commission made to be more ambitious and to make sure that aviation is going along the path of decarbonization and fighting climate change. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Paulus for 1 minute.
Herr Präsident, Frau Kommissarin, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen! Unzweifelhaft hat das Fliegen Menschen zusammengebracht und internationalen Austausch in einem Maß ermöglicht, wie man es sich vor 100 Jahren nicht hätte vorstellen können. Aber ebenso unzweifelhaft ist Fliegen die energieintensivste Art der Mobilität und beruht vollständig auf fossilen Brennstoffen. Mit Refuel EU Aviation soll jetzt der Umstieg auf nachhaltige Kraftstoffe eingeläutet werden. Aber es ist eben nicht nachhaltig, wenn neue Kraftstoffe auf der Basis problematischer Rohstoffe wie Palmöldestillat oder Zwischenfrüchten angerechnet werden dürfen. Wir sollten vielmehr auf die einzig skalierbare Lösung setzen, und das sind nun mal synthetische Kraftstoffe hergestellt aus erneuerbaren Strom. Und gerade industriepolitisch sollten wir hier die Vorreiterrolle europäischer Unternehmen stärken und ambitionierte, aber realistische Quoten festlegen, denn das Potenzial für nachhaltige Biokraftstoffe ist begrenzt. Wir werden keine neuen Kontinente entdecken mit bebaubarem Land. Ich habe kein Problem mit Technologieoffenheit, aber sie muss die physikalische Realität berücksichtigen. Und deshalb bitte ich Sie, stimmen Sie für unsere Änderungsanträge und sichern Sie der Luftfahrt eine nachhaltige Zukunft. Kleiner Nachsatz an Herrn Gade: Wenn die Fristen so kurz sind, ist klar, dass der Industrieausschuss keine Anträge stellen kann. Danke.
Thank you. Now, on behalf of the Commission, I'd like to give the floor to Commissioner Simpson, please.
Honourable Chair, Mr. Rapporteur, honourable members of Parliament, the Commission would like to congratulate Mr. Gada for the report, which was overwhelmingly adopted in the TRAN Committee on 27th of June. We would also like to thank him for the excellent work he has carried out on refuel aviation with the support of TRAN, shadow rapporteurs and the associated committees, ENVI and ITRE. It is good to see this important file moving forward. As you know, as an important element of the Fit for 55 package, it is a key deliverable of the European Green Deal and will play a crucial role in decarbonising aviation. We urgently need to create a market for sustainable aviation fuels and put aviation on a path to carbon neutrality by 2050. Sustainable aviation fuels are an essential component to contribute to decarbonising aviation in the near term, in particular for medium and long-haul flights, where liquid fuels are expected to remain predominant at least until 2050. When deployed at large scale, they will enable a significant reduction of CO2 and other pollutant emissions from the sector, allowing citizens to connect by plane across the EU and beyond more responsibly already in the short term. The report adopted in the TRAN Committee is the result of a well-balanced compromise following months of discussions. Whilst, as usual at this stage, the Commission reserves its judgment until it formally enters into trialogue discussions with the European Parliament and Council, we consider that the report we are debating today goes in the right direction on many aspects, even if some amendments are of concern. The Commission particularly welcomes the report's emphasis on the need for an EU-level harmonised regulation that provides for a level playing field for aviation in the EU internal market. In addition, the proposed Sustainable Aviation Fuels Allowance Scheme could help bridge the remaining price gap between these fuels and fossil fuels, while the creation of a fund dedicated to aviation sustainability might deserve further analysis. We also welcome provisions on better monitoring of substances causing non-CO2 effects. On other aspects of the report, the Commission has some reservations, as some of the amendments could reduce the efficiency of the regulation. Let me mention 3 points of critical importance. First, it is key to make sure that the regulation supports innovative sustainable aviation fuels, technologies and feedstock with high decarbonisation and scalability potential. Expanding the sustainable aviation fuels definition could delay investments in advanced biofuels and e-fuels, which are needed in very large volumes already in the medium term. Quality should prevail over quantity. Setting higher binding targets must be carefully considered in terms of the overall environmental integrity of the proposal, the burden placed on air carriers, and the need to maintain a well-functioning aviation market. The regulation should aim to ensure a level playing field among air operators and airports within the EU and to avoid carbon leakage. And finally, on the transition period, we must keep in mind the objective that sustainable aviation fuels should be physically available at all airports as soon as possible. There is no evidence that establishing a book and claim system, in other words, a virtual sustainable aviation fuels market, would bring any benefits, nor that such a system could be put in place without risks of fraud. In conclusion, there is a clear need for swift action, and we have a clear pathway. By delivering a robust legal framework, we will encourage investments and allow the EU sustainable aviation fuels production capacity to scale up at the necessary pace to meet our climate goals. I look forward to the discussion today, and once again I thank the rapporteur and shadow rapporteurs for their work on this file.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Προχωρούμε στον κύκλο των ομιλητών εκ μέρους των πολιτικών ομάδων για την ομάδα του Ευρωπαϊκού Λαϊκού Κόμματος
from the EPP, I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Monteiro de Aguiar for 2 minutes.
Muito obrigada, Sr. Presidente, Sra. Comissária, caros colegas. Permitam-me começar por enaltecer o espírito de abertura e de compromisso do relator Soren Gade, mas também neste processo de negociação, mas também um agradecimento que se estende a todos os colegas dos restantes grupos políticos, muitas vezes com posições divergentes, aliás, muitas delas antagónicas. Julgo que primámos por debate construtivo, fundamentado, que acaba por só valorizar o documento que hoje submeteremos à votação. Todos reconhecemos que o setor da aviação enfrenta processo de transição difícil, mas, sendo difícil, é necessário para a sua descarbonização. Reconhecemos da parte do legislador, reconhecem também os agentes económicos desta indústria. As tecnologias de produção de combustível sintéticos encontram-se ainda num estágio de desenvolvimento incipiente. Por isso defendemos uma maior abrangência da definição de combustíveis sustentáveis da aviação, numa lógica de maior abertura a várias soluções tecnológicas, em especial quando nos referimos aos biocombustíveis. Este aspecto alargado permitiria uma maior flexibilidade e tornaria as metas da Comissão Europeia já para 2025 mais realistas. Porque não nos basta sermos ambiciosos. Precisamos ser pragmáticos. Precisamos sustentar as nossas decisões em factos. Não devemos enverdar por utopias ou dogmas ideológicos que apenas criam problemas à indústria,
approaches that would create problems for industry, but not only, also for people and for the citizens that want and need to travel
ao objetivo final, as zero
and want to contribute to the final objective of zero CO2 emissions, so net zero. We are ready for industry to make this transition. Now, I'd just like to refer to the fact that the objectives that we have set for synthetic fuels are not realistic in the short term. That could create problems specifically for those countries in the south and in the east. Without a scaled-up production at competitive prices, these objectives will throw the internal market off kilter, and that will make the transition difficult. We do not want to establish more difficulties, challenges for our citizens. That would sap our environmental objectives, and as legislators, we have the job to make sure this doesn't happen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bergqvist.
Bästa ordförande, bästa ledamöter.
President,
Först
members,
tack till
let
rapportören
me
och
start by thanking the
skuggrapportörerna för
rapporteur and the
konstruktiva
shadows for
tidvis tuffa
a
förhandlingar.
very constructive but
Även ett tack till våra
obviously
medarbetare
tough
som jobbar väldigt
negotiations.
hårt med
And thank you very much to our staff who've been working very hard with this
Flyg är något
report.
absolut nödvändigt för en
Now,
fungerande
flight is
värld, och
absolutely
därför är också
necessary
absolut
for a
nödvändigt att
well-functioning
flyget är
world. So it's
miljövänligt.
absolutely
Den
necessary that
socialdemokratiska
flight
gruppen har
is
drivit och fått gehör för
environmentally
att
friendly. So our
sätta
group
målsättningarna högre och snabbare.
has tried to have better
Och också
and
vi måste
more
ha en
demanding
fungerande miljö för de som arbetar inom flygbranschen.
Also, we have to have the right kind of environment for
De
those who
avlägsna
work within
regionerna
the
måste vi också ta
aviation
särskilt hänsyn
sector.
till, för
Also,
de
we
är
have to
extra
take
beroende av flyg
into account remote areas because they're particularly dependent on flight.
När jag tittar på utvecklingen i flygbranschen och när jag tittar på den här rapporten så är jag övertygad om att när vi reser och transporterar saker om inte allt för många år så kommer vi att göra det med det miljövänligaste transportslagen. Ser fram emot den kommande trilogen med kommissionen och kommissionär Simpson.
Thank you very much.
Σας ευχαριστώ για την ομάδα Renew Europe. Το λόγο έχει τώρα η κυρία Bilbao Barandica για ένα λεπτό.
Mrs. Bilbao Barandica for Renew.
Gracias.
Thank you
Quiero felicitar
very
a mi
much. I
colega
should like to
Sorengade porque su
congratulate
propuesta
my
por
colleague
equilibrada y
Sorengade for
realista
such
será
a
capaz de convertir
well-balanced
las
and
buenas
realistic
intenciones
proposal
en hechos
because it's
concretos.
always
Y
difficult
ese es el
to
mejor elogio que se
translate
puede
good
hacer de un
intentions
texto
into
legal.
something real and
Es más
tangible.
exigente con los
This is a
porcentajes de
legal
utilización
text,
progresiva de
and
combustibles
it is
sostenibles en la
more
aviación que se
demanding
aplicará a
when
todas
it
las
comes
compañías
to
que
the
operen más de
proportion of
500 vuelos
sustainable
anuales.
fuels. For
Responsabiliza a los
companies
gestores
that
de los
operate more than
aeropuertos de
15,000
dotarlos
flights
de
per
las
year, it is
infraestructuras
extended
necesarias.
to the airports
Contempla la
across Europe, giving
problemática
them
de
time
las
to
regiones
adapt their
ultraperiféricas
infrastructure
y actualiza
as
la lista
necessary,
de
and we need
combustibles
to update the list of
sostenibles,
alternative
exceptuando siempre los que
sustainable
procedan de
fuels,
materias primas cuya
and we need
producción puede
to
competir con la alimentaria.
look at the raw
Obliga a
materials that
actualizar
can
cada
be
3 años la lista para
used,
incorporar las novedades que
but
produzca
bear
la
in mind that they also
innovación.
need for
De
food,
hecho,
and that is
durante
why we need
estas
more
negociaciones
innovation.
se han
During
introducido ya fuentes
negotiations,
como la
we
electricidad o los
have
combustibles sintéticos
decided
producidos a
to
partir del
include
hidrógeno verde,
sources such
que
as
son
electricity
un ejemplo del
in
avance
sustainable
tecnológico. Se
fuels,
propone
which
además
are a
un
signal
sistema de
of
seguimiento y
technological
sancionador
advances,
que
and we
permite
also
prevenir
use
fraudes,
a monitoring
castigarlos
system
cuando
in
se
order to
produzcan
prevent
y
fraud, to
destinar el
sanction
dinero
fraud where
recaudado
it
por
does
las sanciones
occur,
a la
and make
innovación en
sure
este
that any
campo.
money
Un ejemplo
which is
de
collected
cómo
in fines
convertir
is
una
then
multa en un
invested
ejercicio de
into
economía
innovation
circular.
and research. And so
Gracias.
this is an exercise
Σας
in the circular
ευχαριστώ
economy.
για την ομάδα των Πρασίνων. Το λόγο έχει τώρα για 2 λεπτά.
Thank you very much. Now, for 2 minutes, Mr. Kuf, please.
Vice President Papadimoulis, Commissioner Simpson, colleagues. We just heard of record temperatures and droughts affecting the European Union, so it's a fitting time to discuss the decarbonisation of aviation. And this refuel proposal is a positive step forward. Unfortunately, while the Commission proposal lacked the ambition needed to decarbonise aviation's fuel mix as rapidly as the climate emergency demands, this Parliament has opted to weaken the proposal and the ambition further, specifically when it comes to how we define a sustainable fuel. If we get this wrong, the decision will come back to haunt us in the years to come. And it is crucial that we get it right because with the first generation biofuels, we failed to anticipate the problems that arose. And regrettably, the Tran Committee agreed on a weakened definition of sustainable aviation fuel. ITRI and ENVI, who share competence, approved the Commission's definition. And this expanded definition allows unsustainable fuels to be burned in planes, palm oil byproducts, food crops, and recycled carbon fuels. And the use of biofuels will have severe land use change impacts. And that means more and more amounts of land will be needed to grow food, feed, and power planes. And that's why the additional biofuel feedstocks added by Tran are so problematic. They include palm fatty acid distillate, a palm oil byproduct, which means forests will be cleared to meet demand. They also include intermediate crops, which in Europe are often grown for environmental reasons related to soil health, but outside the EU, they're grown as cash crops. And for this reason, I urge colleagues to return to the Commission's definition of biofuels, and I'm glad that the major European airlines agree with our view. And Amendments 112, 118 and 136 can address these issues. So let's send a signal to the markets today that Europe wants to ramp up production of e-fuels, not unsustainable biofuels. And we can make Europe a market leader in e-fuel production, which will help reduce their costs. Parliament's vote today can decide if aviation plays its part in addressing the climate emergency. Industry and technology are ready. So today is a crucial day for ensuring that aviation plays its part in addressing the climate emergency, and I hope we can meet this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, on behalf of the Identity and Democracy Group, Ms. Benyou, for 2 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much,
À quel moment
President.
comptez-vous établir un projet de transition
When are you going to come
écologique
up
à la
with
fois
an
durable pour
environmental
l'environnement
transition
et supportable pour les
program
Européens?
that will be
Ce n'est évidemment pas le
sustainable
cas aujourd'hui car ce projet de
for the
règlement
environment
est purement
and
utopiste et
that citizens can
schizophrène.
accept.
Seulement
This
6%
is
des vols et long courriers
utopic
génèrent
and
la moitié des
schizophrenic.
émissions de
In
CO2 de
fact,
l'aviation.
only one
Pourquoi donc
half
se
of
concentrer
CO2
uniquement sur
emissions
les
from
vols de
aviation
courte
are
distance?
going to be addressed
Il n'y
here,
a
so
aucune
why
logique dans
focus
ce
just
projet.
on short-haul
Ensuite,
flight?
vous ne semblez pas réaliser le coût financier de
This is
tels
not
aménagements.
realistic.
Vous
And in
contraignez
fact,
les
you're not
aéroports à
assisting
construire des bornes de
households. You're
recharge surpuissantes
calling on
à l'horizon
airports to come
2025.
up with
Toutefois, rien dans ce texte
building plans
n'indique
by
clairement à quelle hauteur les
2050
aéroports et
for
les
this
compagnies aériennes
purpose.
seront
But there
subventionnés.
is no
Ainsi, ce
indication
projet
of
enverra au tapis un bon
grants
nombre
for
de
these
compagnies
airports.
européennes telles que
If you look
Ryanair,
at a
EasyJet
lot
et bien
of the
d'autres
airlines,
qui
Ryanair,
verront
EasyJet,
s'installer une concurrence
they will
étrangère
find
déloyale encore une
themselves
fois.
competing
Ce texte
with
n'aborde pas
unfair
non plus la
competition
rareté
from
des
elsewhere.
ressources. La
And that is
production de
not
ces
a good
carburants
use of our
verts
resources.
repose sur l'utilisation de
Producing these
résidus agricoles
e-fuels
et sylvicoles,
is done
d'algues, de biomasse
via
ou d'huile de
forest,
cuisson
biomass,
usagées.
and farm
Ces
products.
ressources existent en si faible quantité que la
There
cadence de
are
production
such
pour faire face à la
small
demande
amounts
ne
of
pourra
these
pas être
products
supportable.
in the
De
fuel.
plus, en
This will
produisant
not be
davantage de
able to be
carburants verts, les
maintained.
industriels vont augmenter
Moreover,
mécaniquement
those
leur
in the
empreinte
industry
carbone.
are going to increase
Parce qu'en
their
réalité, l'idée
carbon
derrière ce projet, ce
footprint.
n'est pas de réduire
Underpinning this
l'empreinte
project, the
carbone,
idea is
mais
not to
surtout que tout ce
reduce
qui n'est
the
pas
carbon
électrique
footprint.
est un
It's just
ennemi à
that
abattre encore une
anything
fois.
that is not
Vous ne cachez
electric
plus
is
votre
something
souhait
that
de voir
needs to be
disparaître
fought.
l'avion sans penser
You
aux millions de
are
personnes pour
aiming
qui
to
l'avion est le seul
destroy
moyen de
aviation,
transport
but
pour se
forgetting
rendre dans les
that
métropoles
aviation is the
depuis les
only way
territoires
for many
éloignés.
people to get
Pendant que vous
to
assommez
the
les
continent
Européens avec
from
vos
outermost
projets
regions.
hors sol et vos
Considering
règlements
your
coercitifs,
projects and
la
your
Commission
coercitive
européenne agit en signant
rules,
des
the
traités de
Commission
libre-échange à tout
is
va. Au lieu de
taking
reconnaître que
free
c'est
trade
ce modèle
agreements
économique qui est
and
dangereux
making
pour
them
l'environnement,
king,
vous préférez
whatever the case
culpabiliser
may be for the
l'Européen issu
environment.
des classes
And
moyennes
you're
qui prend
causing
un vol
the
de
middle
Paris à
class
Budapest une
and
fois dans l'année
citizens
et encore.
to feel
C'est
guilty
une
about
énième
going to
ineptie.
Budapest
Je vous
once a
remercie.
year on a holiday, and it's just unacceptable. Thank you.
Το λόγο τώρα έχει για την ομάδα
Thank you
ECR
very
ο κύριος
much. Now,
Ζλωτόφσκι
on
για
behalf
2
of the
λεπτά.
ECR group, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Zlotowski for 2 minutes.
Szanowny Panie Przewodniczący, transport lotniczy to ważna i innowacyjna część europejskiej gospodarki, która jest niezwykle wrażliwa na wszelkie zakłócenia rynkowe. Ostatnie lata pokazały, jak wiele miejsc pracy zniknęło z powodu drastycznego ograniczenia liczby lotów. Wojna na Ukrainie, rosnące ceny paliw i biletów, tłok w europejskiej przestrzeni powietrznej ponownie zagrażają przyszłości tej branży. Próba nakładania na ten
Threatening to impose additional and costly obligations on the sector at such a dramatic time is a mistake. It will affect the competitiveness of European airlines and the cost of air travel. We agree that innovative, environmentally friendly and sustainable fuels will help reduce emissions in air transport. We appreciate the rapporteur's openness to our arguments and the inclusion of many of the ECR group's proposals. We fully support the creation of a fund to invest in research into alternative fuels in aviation. Also, the very definition of sustainable aviation fuel adopted in the Transport Committee is a good compromise. However, the proposed timetable for airlines to increase their share of this type of fuel is, like the entire Fit for 55 package, divorced from economic and social realities. We therefore cannot support this report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now for the left, Mrs. Daly.
Thanks very much, President, and I would like to acknowledge and appreciate the efforts of our rapporteur, who absolutely strove might and main to try and deal with this file and be as inclusive as possible, and him and his staff deserve credit for that. But having said that, the final text is just not credible for us in terms of the sector dealing adequately with its decarbonisation requirements, primarily because of the decision to broaden the definition of sustainable aviation fuels, which we strenuously oppose on the grounds that this is actually not sustainable. Without the caps and restrictions, the text opened the door for new biofuels which are just not suitable for air transport. And during the discussions, we did warn about the risks of fraud with, for example, used cooking oil, which is mainly imported from outside of the EU. And while we have strengthened the text to improve the information provided by suppliers, at the same time there's no sign of a cap as applied in the Renewable Energy Directive, which we thought was very unfortunate. So obviously aviation is energy intensive. The demands for the feedstocks qualified by the current definition would be absolutely enormous. It includes byproducts of the palm oil industry, intermediate crops, and would produce massive risks for land use change, disastrous for the environment, communities and biodiversity. And what we're really trying to do here is square a circle. We're accepting increased demand, which in turn means increased fuel-led demand for feedstocks which are considered sustainable, while at the same time their availability is limited. This is in contradiction with the energy strategy promoted by European authorities, which involves also trying to address lowering consumption, and we're not doing that in this report. Aviation is going to continue to be dependent on fossil fuels for a long time, the price of which is going to continue to rise and be borne by workers, passengers and the climate. And I think, it's all well and good to debate different targets up to 2050, but even if we have a target of 100%, it's not going to matter if the definition allows inappropriate feedstocks. So if we don't address that, we simply cannot vote for this report. I also think the exclusion of private aircraft, so the wealthy who create most of the problems anyway, again are being excluded and pay the least, is regrettable, and the exclusion of military aircraft is also regrettable, particularly in the period of increased traffic. So again, like my colleague Kieran Cuff, we need these amendments to be passed before we can accept this report.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Ολοκληρώθηκε ο κύκλος των ομιλητών εκ μέρους των πολιτικών ομάδων.
Now, this concludes the speeches on behalf of the political group. I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Deli for 1 minute.
President, Madam Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, when we legislate, it is vitally important to do it with an eye to implementation. Good legislation is easy to apply and is sufficiently specific to provide an opportunity to provide appropriate legal framework for for industry and governments. It is a well-known fact that the economy needs predictability for a transition. In recent years, we have unfortunately seen that seemingly cure-all solutions led us astray. We should not repeat the same mistake with sustainable aviation fuels. We must stop airlines passing on these new costs to passengers. Citizens should not be forced to pay the costs of greening. I believe that a more comprehensive definition of fuel, one that is technologically neutral, could help us avoid another dead end. Please be more circumspect when you vote today.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Επόμενος ομιλητής για 1,5 λεπτό, κύριος Μαρινέσκου.
Now for a minute and a half, Mr. Marinescu.
Mulțumesc, domnule președinte, doamna comisar, stimați colegi. Progresul tehnologic în industria de aviație este remarcabil în ultimii 20 de ani. Motoarele au redus emisiile cu peste 30%. E adevărat, nivelul de emisii a crescut pentru că a crescut traficul, pentru că cetățenii Uniunii au călătorit și
that's a means of transport with which citizens use often.
Progresul tehnologic va continua în Clean Sky.
It makes it all quite easier. And with Clean Sky, we're going to continue this progress.
Combustibilul alternativ.
However,
și cred că trebuie să
above
folosim
all,
toate
we have to look at alternative fuels. And I think we should use all means of technology in order to promote these alternatives. And the definition which is being proposed, I believe, is a good definition. And I think it respects all legislation, also LULUCF.
Țintele
pentru
combustibilii e-fuels sunt mult mai mari decât cele propuse de comisie. Trebuie să fim realiști și să știm exact ce se poate produce în Uniune și în același timp să știm că prețul acestui combustibil este de 10 ori mai mare decât al kerosenului. Noi susținem țintele propuse de comisie. Includerea, aplicarea acestui regulament pentru toate aeroporturile fără un sistem va fi imposibilă, pentru că nu poți să aplici regulamentul în 800 de aeroporturi fără a avea un sistem care să faciliteze intrarea pe piață a combustibililor alternativi. Fondul pentru aviație este necesar pentru că e nevoie de investiții în această
so we need a necessary fund in order to do the investment.
Thank you. Now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Vitanov.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Dear colleagues, sustainable aviation fuel can reduce the life cycle carbon footprint of aviation fuel up to 80%, but they currently make up less than 0.1% of total aviation fuel consumption. By adopting this report, we will substantially increase the amount of SAF produced and uplifted, leading to aviation in the EU using at least 85% clean fuels by 2050. We will also increase the number of synthetic aviation fuels up to 22% more in 2050 compared to the Commission proposal. We will also send a very clear signal to the industry by introducing binding mandate for synthetic aviation fuels already in 2025. So the report adopted by TRAN Committee is a good base for future negotiations with the Council, which will deliver the European regulatory framework and foster innovation, production and deployment of sustainable fuels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now for 1 minute, Ms. Rees.
Monsieur le Président, le
Thank you very
secteur
much,
aérien
President.
fait 4% des
The
émissions de
aviation
carbone mondial, c'est
sector
surtout
accounts for
une croissance
40%
fulgurante à
of
l'horizon
global
2050,
carbon emissions,
ce qui veut dire de toute
and
évidence
we
qu'il
are
doit
likely to see
aussi
exponential
participer à
growth
notre
by
objectif de
2050, and so
neutralité
that is why
carbone.
we
Et
do
ça
everything
veut
to
dire
get
des
them to
avions plus légers,
contribute to our carbon
ça veut dire
neutrality
des
goal,
quantités
which
de carbone,
means
de
that we
carburant
will
embarqué
need
mieux
to
calculé,
make
et
sure
ça veut
that we
dire
better
surtout des
calculate the
énergies
amount of
nouvelles.
fuel
Et l'excellent
which
rapport
is
de mon
uplifted.
collègue
Now,
Søren
this
Gede va
report
dans
from
ce sens.
CERN, my
L'électricité,
colleague, is
l'hydrogène,
excellent
les carburants
because
synthétiques, bien évidemment, et
synthetic
ça, ce sera pour
fuels,
demain. Pour les
hydroelectricity,
biocarburants, la
obviously,
technologie
is
est
for
plus
the
avancée,
future.
et là, ce sont les
Biotechnology,
volumes
however, is
que nous
making
devons
strides,
augmenter,
and so
et
we've got
surtout
to
pas en
increase the
embarquant des
volumes,
PFAS, ce
and
coproduit de l'huile de
certainly
palme
we must not
brute ou PFAS.
use
Le résultat est le même,
gross
la déforestation, la
palm
destruction
oil
de la
for fuels,
biodiversité,
because
et
we
cet
see
impact
vast swathes of
climatique
forest
qui
which are
est désastreux.
destroyed,
Nous n'en voulons pas, les
biodiversity
citoyens n'en
which is
veulent pas, et
undermined.
l'industrie
We don't
aérienne
want it,
elle-même
citizens don't want
n'en
it, and
veut
the
pas.
aviation
Un seul
industry
vote
doesn't want
donc
it
utile et
either.
efficace pour
So
l'avenir est
the
possible, je l'ai dit,
only
soutenir
way
le
we
rapport de
can
Søren
be
Gede et
effective
les
in the
amendements
future is to
112 et
support Søren
134
Gard's
pour
report,
rendre les
amendments
carburants
112
de
and
l'aviation de demain
134. Please
vraiment
support them
durables.
because the fuels of tomorrow must be
Σας
genuinely
ευχαριστώ.
sustainable.
Επόμενος ομιλητής για ένα λεπτό,
Thank you
κύριος
very
Ελκάου.
much. Now for 1 minute, Mr. Eckhout, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think history repeats itself. When we were discussing biofuels, we made the mistake of creating too much space for the first generation with the idea that maybe later on the second generation will come. What happened? The first generation has become so dominant that it has become an obstacle for the development of the newer biofuels, the more advanced biofuels. We need to prevent that from happening here. And that's why it is such a wrong thing to do, is to opening up and to broaden the definition of sustainable aviation fuels. We wanted the development of the sustainable aviation fuels, but we wanted the development of the more advanced, and not the ones that could be palm oil, that could be intermediate crops, that can be food crops. That is the wrong direction. We need to correct this, because that will make sure we are developing the real sustainable aviation fuels. And let's be honest, I'm a bit nervous, but even a company like Lufthansa is coming up with the same arguments as I am. I think that should make you think.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eickhout. Now for 1 minute, Ms. Bentley.
Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren,
Ladies and
Frau
gentlemen,
Kommissarin,
Mrs.
die
Commissioner,
Diskussionen um die Refuel-EU-Verordnung waren nicht einfach, denn es geht um viel. Um neue Verpflichtungen für Flughäfen, für Fluggesellschaften und für Treibstoffhersteller. Es geht um Mobilität in Europa, vor allem für entlegenere Regionen. Es geht um die Konkurrenz verschiedener Sektoren, um das knappe Gut alternative Treibstoffe und um die Stellung Europas im internationalen Wettbewerb. Vor allem aber geht es darum, mit der Dekarbonisierung des Luftverkehrssektors ernst zu machen. Bis 2030 müssen im europäischen Luftverkehr 55% CO2-Emissionen eingespart werden, und das bei ungebrochener Fluglust der Europäer. Wir brauchen also eine Revolution bei der Flugzeugproduktion, bei den verwendeten Werkstoffen, den Antrieben und den Treibstoffen. Die EU hat die Forschung in diesem Bereich in den letzten Jahren mit Milliarden Euro unterstützt und die Industrie mittlerweile auch Prototypen vorgestellt. Bis 2030 müssen aus meiner Sicht vor allem die Produktion von synthetischen Treibstoffen im Zentrum stehen. Denn Biokerosin wird mengenmäßig immer begrenzt bleiben und birgt Nutzungskonflikte. Deshalb brauchen wir jetzt dringend folgendes Signal. E-Fuels sind die Zukunft und Early Movers können substanziell von europäischen Geldern profitieren. Und wie immer gilt, je schneller es skaliert wird, desto schneller.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Bentele. Es folgt Herr Kollege Ertug.
Mr. Ertug,
für
now,
1 Minute.
For 1 minute.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, sehr geehrte Frau Kommissarin, sehr geehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Die Luftfahrt ist ein wichtiger Bereich, ein wichtiger Industriezweig, das ist richtig. Sie verursacht 2,1% der globalen CO2-Emissionen und in Europa sind es sogar mehr. In der EU haben wir 3,8%. Und das ist auch deswegen so wichtig, weil dieser Sektor am schwierigsten mit zu dekarbonisieren ist. Wir haben hier keine Möglichkeit zunächst, heute vielleicht auch morgen noch nicht, eben zu elektrifizieren. Wir müssen hier den Weg auch von Alternativen gehen. Deswegen ist die Technologieoffenheit so wichtig. Und deswegen ist auch wichtig,
that is why new technology is so important, and that is why it's so important that we support R&D in that area. So we hear that 2035 will be the earliest possible date for having hydrogen fuel in the aviation sector, some time off. But nevertheless, it is important that we have this regulation and important that we see that everything that goes into the tanks doesn't lead to scarcity or shortages elsewhere. So it's not a bad idea, but there is no protection against misuse, and that is why we need a better alternative in actual fact. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Ertug. And now for 1 minute, Ms. Bausa-Diaz.
Muchas gracias, presidente. El precio de un vuelo entre Frankfurt y Palma de Mallorca para el 1 de agosto supera ya los 400 euros. Las causas son varias, indudablemente. La coyuntura internacional, el aumento de los precios de los combustibles, que aumenta el coste y mucho. En el año 2022, una cuarta parte del coste de los totales de las operaciones es debido a los combustibles. Ante esta situación, probablemente podríamos pensar que los precios de los combustibles promoverían que la industria hiciera lo máximo en ese como decimos en España, a la fuerza ahorcan. Es una cuestión de vida o muerte. Pero yo creo que tenemos la oportunidad de hacer de la necesidad virtud y desarrollar un mercado europeo de combustibles sostenibles, competitivos, asequibles y también accesibles. Y no hagámoslo por imperativo legal, hagámoslo también de la mano del sector. Y en ese sentido necesitamos la colaboración público-privada, necesitamos incentivos, necesitamos inversiones y también flexibilidad para que le demos a la industria, en primer lugar, no la criminalicemos, le demos recursos y tiempo para poder conseguirlo. En definitiva, de lo contrario, si no hacemos nada de eso, el incremento de los precios se multiplicará y haremos lo contrario a lo que queremos, que es la en este caso, democratización de los vuelos. Y finalmente quisiera agradecer y felicitar a mis compañeros Faragada, al reporter, por su excelente trabajo precisamente en ese sentido.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Bausa-Diaz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bausa-Diaz.
Wir haben eine blaue Karte.
Blue card?
Von Frau Paulus. Herr Kollege Bausa-Diaz.
Mr. Bausa-Diaz.
Do you accept the question from colleague Paulus?
Thank you very much. My question is actually when you're talking about that we need to keep the cost at bay and we need to democratize aviation. Are you aware that about 20% of the world's population are in the situation to be able to enter a plane on economical reasons, and that 1% of the world's population is responsible for more than 50% of emissions, and that the ticket prices reflect less than 1/3 of the cost which is actually inflicted on society by aviation? How do you judge that? Thank you.
How many time do you have? How many time? 1 minute. Thank you so much for your question. Well, let's talk about some figures. You don't say that only 2% of CO2 emissions are because of the aviation sector. And we have to allow that the industry can rise to that full goal. If we are doing alone without counting with the industry, we'll be alone. And will be possible to democratize, obviously, this situation. Not only the use of the flight of the aviation sector is not only for tourism, it's as well for business. It's as well for small and medium companies to allow them to show their products. It's as well for a healthy situation. Therefore, many questions. Don't do populism with that. Use the right figures. Only 2% of CO2 emissions is due to the aviation sector. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Bausa-Diaz. Es folgt für 1 Minute Frau Kollegin Delli.
Ms. Delli.
Madame la Commissaire, mes chers collègues, nous nous apprêtons à voter un texte qui a pour ambition de décarboner le secteur de l'aviation. L'enjeu est de taille. Les émissions de l'aviation explosent, l'aviation représente déjà 3% des émissions mondiales. Et le trafic aérien va continuer d'augmenter de plus de 50% en 2035. Nous devons décarboner ce secteur et remplacer ce kérosène qui est un des carburants les plus polluants du monde par des carburants durables. Mais encore faut-il
fuels, and we need sustainable fuels instead, but they have to be genuinely sustainable. And I would therefore call on you, colleagues, to vote against palm oil derivatives such as beef fat or any kind of food crops. They should not be on that list of sustainable fuels and revert to the European Commission's original list. We've got a climate emergency, so let's invest in the most sustainable fuels, synthetic fuels, hydrogen and electricity, for example, but not in those kinds of substitutes which have a huge environmental and social impact and which lead to deforestation, which is going to be terrible in years to come, and all kinds of deleterious consequences, and which will be a stain on our aviation industry in Europe. So let's make the right choice for the climate and for future generations. Thank you very much, Ms. Deli. And now for 1 minute, Ms. Tax.
Dank u wel, voorzitter, geachte commissaris. Vliegschaamte. De meeste mensen van ons hebben er last van. In 2018 was het zelfs genomineerd tot woord van het jaar. Mensen willen zich verplaatsen op een betaalbare en duurzame manier zonder dat onze planeet schade ondervindt. Deze Fuel EU Aviation Wet is daarom van groot belang en gaat ons daarbij helpen door brandstofleveranciers en vliegtuigmaatschappijen te verplichten om SAFs te gebruiken en te maken. Sustainable Aviation Fuels zijn 80% duurzamer dan kerosine. Hiermee maakt de EU het verschil voor ons allemaal. Vliegen zonder schaamte in de toekomst. Maar waar de EU ook een verschil moet maken is voor de mensen met slecht betaalde banen en zware werkomstandigheden in de transportsector. En in het bijzonder nu in de luchthavens. Het oude systeem van goedkoop en vervuilend reizen ten faveur van dikke winsten voor aandeelhouders en ten koste van mens en milieu, daar moeten we een halt aan doen.
Increasing the profits of the shareholders at the expense of climate. We have to end.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tax. And now for 1 minute, colleague Urchin.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, verehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen,
Frau Kommissarin. Zunächst herzlichen Glückwunsch an die Kollegin Gade für seinen exzellenten Report.
Warmest congratulations to Mr.
Gade on the report. I've got 3 comments
to
make.
Wir wollen, dass wir noch schneller auf alternative Kraftstoffe im Flugverkehr setzen. Denn alternative Kraftstoffe sind die einzige Möglichkeit, wie wir den Flugverkehr dekarbonisieren können. Deswegen gibt es höhere Ziele bei der Beimischung, aber es soll auch die Basis für die Produktion verbreitert werden. Ich halte das für sinnvoll. Aus einem Grund. Die Nachhaltigkeitskriterien, die wir festlegen, die werden immer weiter gesichert, denn die werden in der RED geregelt, verehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Deswegen braucht hier niemand eine Sorge haben, dass diese Nachhaltigkeitskriterien gerissen werden. Zweiter Gedanke, es ist vorgeschlagen in dem Bericht vom Kollegen Gade, den auf alle Flughäfen auszuweiten und damit auf mehr Flughäfen als von der Kommission vorgesehen. Dafür braucht man dann aber auch ein flexibles System, wie diese Kraftstoffe angenommen werden. Und deswegen ist vorgeschlagen, Book and Claim einzuführen. Ich halte das für eine gute Lösung, die der Kollege Gade hier vorschlägt, denn es bringt Flexibilität in das System. Und dritter Gedanke, das ist das Thema Wettbewerbsfähigkeit. Wir müssen aufpassen, dass mit dem Vorschlag wir nicht das Kind mit dem Bade ausschütten und wir eine Wettbewerbsverzerrung für die europäischen Airlines bekommen.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Ötchen. Es folgt Frau Kollegin Wind für 1 Minute.
Ms. Wind for 1 minute.
Tak, formand. Det er jo pionererne, der i forrige århundrede opfandt flyvemaskinen. Den har givet os en følelse af frihed. Men vores frihed er nu truet. Truet af det sorte aftryk, vi efterlader os hver eneste gang vi flyver.
Impression we leave every time we fly. And right now we're standing on the threshold of a new era, an era for green flight. It's time to act now. For the green transformation of aviation won't happen by itself. It requires a pioneering spirit and investment. We need sustainable fuels, and there's not sufficient right now. But we need to create a greater demand in order to supply enough fuel. It's simple logic. We need inexpensive green fuel. We don't need a bureaucratic ceiling on our green ambitions. What we need is a high ceiling for high political ambitions and freedom for all of those who want to lead the way to invest in sustainable fuel. That's the only way we can ensure a less expensive alternative to fossil fuels. It's time to give our eras pioneers the freedom to lead the way to future
Vielen
flight.
Dank, Frau Kollegin Wintz. Es folgt für eine Minute Frau Kollegin Nachtigall.
Dank u wel, voorzitter, en schönen Tag.
Thank you very much,
We nemen met
President.
elkaar een vlucht richting een groenere luchtvaart. Een Europees bijmengpercentage van de luchtvaart is van ongekend belang. En ik hoor ook geluiden
a more
om me heen
sustainable
van
approach,
het
we
gaat niet
have
ver
to
genoeg.
really
Of
take
het
full
is maar een
measure of
druppel
the
op de
fact
gloeiende plaat.
that we can't simply say this isn't enough.
Kijk
Or
naar
we need to
Nederland.
approach this differently.
Zelfs
What we
Nederland
really
zet een
need to do
sprint in
is
met
look, for
14%
example, to what's happening
bijmengverplichting in
in the
2030.
Netherlands.
Maar ook
In
met
the
Europa
Netherlands,
nemen met dit voorstel
the
een
mandatory
sprong voorwaarts.
portion was 15%.
Met
And in this
biobrandstoffen, met
proposal,
synthetische
what we can
brandstoffen.
see is that
En
we
beide zullen
are
helpen op weg
trying to do
naar een
more
duurzame
with
en
synthetic
toekomstbestendige
fuels,
luchtvaart.
biofuels,
En op termijn
and
ook
I
elektrisch
believe that this
vliegen of
is
vliegen op
moving in the
waterstof.
right direction. It will
Kansen
make
genoeg.
aviation sustainable.
En elke airline
Hydrogen, electricity, we have to open up the possibility to this existing. If each airline were to
ook airlines uit landen
earmark a portion of its funds towards R&D for this purpose, then we will have more sustainable technology in the future, but avoiding distorted competition. It is precisely this proposal that we have in this tax. It really puts everyone on level footing,
Vielen
and
Dank,
we
Frau
are ready
Kollegin
to take
Nachtigall.
offense.
Es folgt für eine Minute Herr Kollege Ferrandino.
Now for 1 minute, Ms. Ferrandino.
Grazie Presidente, gentili colleghi. Sappiamo che serve uno sforzo congiunto per centrare gli obiettivi climatici e quindi anche l'aviazione deve contribuire. I combustibili sostenibili SAF rappresentano un passaggio cruciale. Serve una strategia di medio-lungo periodo perché l'Europa produca e fornisca questa tipologia di carburanti, perché l'indipendenza energetica che stiamo cercando in maniera così affannosa passa anche da queste azioni. Questo regolamento è centrale nella creazione di un mercato sano di carburanti sostenibili. Perciò le misure in esse contenute vanno valutate senza dogmi ideologici. La quota minima di SAF da introdurre come obbligo a partire dal 2025 è fondamentale. Come centrale è garantire gli stessi obblighi di utilizzo in tutta l'Unione Europea. Va sostenuto anche il sistema che richiede a tutti gli operatori europei e non di rifornirsi per almeno il 90% del carburante necessario negli aeroporti delle unioni da cui partono, per evitare che si eluda la regola del SAF. Dobbiamo prepararci all'adozione delle nuove tecnologie ad emissioni zero per tempo, quindi dobbiamo chiedere ai nostri aeroporti di dotarsi delle infrastrutture necessarie per le ricariche di idrogeno ed elettricità.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Ferrandino. Wir kommen zum Catch-the-Eye-Verfahren und es spricht Frau Kollegin Grappini.
Ms. Grappini.
Mulțumesc, domnule președinte, doamna comisar, stimați colegi. Trebuie să pornim de la ideea că transportul aerian este extrem de important pentru economie și că transportul aerian din Uniunea Europeană nu este singur pe pământ. Avem transport aerian în alte părți ale globului, unde, sigur, emisiile sunt mult mai mari decât în Uniunea Europeană, unde avem doar 2%. Sunt de acord că trebuie să lucrăm la decarbonizarea sectorului aviatic, dar trebuie să o facem rațional. Și mă bucur, doamna comisar, că v-ați gândit
but we have to do it in a sensible way. And perhaps the Commission has reflected on the impact of the sector. We have to do this step by step. We have to do it in the appropriate rhythm so that the industry can keep up. We can't simply take all amendments into account. For example, those which would have impact on the smaller airlines and on the smaller airports. We have to keep them in mind.
Negativ are asupra cetățenilor, asupra economiei, asupra turismului.
Acum, noi trebuie să luăm măsuri raționale și mă bucur că sunt colegi care au spus acest lucru. Trebuie să facem decarbonizarea în ritmul în care industria permite. Mulțumesc. We have to have decarbonization that we can manage.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Grappini. Das
Catch-the-Eye-Verfahren ist damit abgeschlossen. That concludes our Catch-the-Eye session. To conclude the debate now, Commissioner Simpson.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very interesting and lively exchange, which confirms that we are in the making of a decisive piece of legislation for the future of sustainable aviation. And I have taken good note of the points made. Some of you expressed concerns that the original Commission proposal was not ambitious enough. Refuel EU aviation will be the first regulation in the world to set binding e-fuel obligations on fuel suppliers. This is very ambitious. Targets proposed by the Commission take into account the status of the industry, the expected developments of the industry, the high needs in renewable electricity and hydrogen, and the additional costs for airlines. However, when it comes to setting legally binding e-fuel targets, we need to be cautious. Setting e-fuel targets too high could risk undermining the credibility of our framework, risk shortages of supply, imposing significant penalties for non-compliance on our industry, or impose disproportionate financial burden on airlines. And of course, it is very welcome if industry is in a position to supply or use more e-fuels on a voluntary basis. Our proposal certainly aims to encourage the industry to do so. The Commission also suggests that the regulation should support predominantly advanced biofuels and e-fuels, which will be needed in very large volumes in the mid-term and long-term, and supporting low-end feedstock will not make it easier to reach the targets, but will create risks of lock-ins, and there is a reputational risk associated with the expansion of the definition. Aviation needs clean fuels to decarbonize, not a controversy on the sustainability of SAF. And I would like to conclude by calling on the plenary to take a pragmatic approach towards the vote and consider this necessary milestone to engage in fruitful discussions with the Council on an issue that could not be more timely. And of course, Commission services will remain available to support Parliament as much as possible during these dialogues. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kommissarin
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner.
Zum Abschluss der Aussprache nun nochmals der Berichterstatter, Kollege
the rapporteur, once again, Mr. Gade.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for all these remarks. As I mentioned earlier, it isn't possible to make everyone happy. Many of your contributions have been a friendly reminder of that, so thank you very much, dear colleagues. As I mentioned in my introduction, it was my job to get many different interests to come together, and some will have book and claim, others were against it, some will have a broader definition of SAF, some will be more narrow, some will have higher drop-ins, some will have lower. However, let me recall that we have to have a negotiating mandate. The Transport Committee's proposal is that which has received the most support in the committee. So I think it's a really good starting point. I look very much forward to seeing this being adopted by the Parliament's members, and I look forward to the trilogue negotiations.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Gade. Die Aussprache ist damit geschlossen.
So we have now concluded the discussion, and now we're going to vote at
Als nächster Punkt der Tagesordnung folgt der Bericht von Herrn Kollegen Wölken betreffend bessere Rechtsetzung mit vereinten Kräften für bessere Rechtsvorschriften. Aber ich darf zunächst noch eine Sache bekannt geben. Im Anschluss an den Rücktritt von Frau Konstanze Krehl stellt das Parlament gemäß der Geschäftsordnung das Freiwerden ihres Sitzes mit Wirkung zum 3. Oktober 2022 fest und unterrichtet die zuständigen nationalen Behörden. So, jetzt zum Bericht von Herrn Kollegen Wölken. Beginnt die Aussprache für 4 Minuten.
4 minutes, sir.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident Wieland, dear Commissioner Šefčovič, dear colleagues, better lawmaking should be a common goal for all EU lawmakers. It is the core of our work. We owe it to the European citizens to make sure that European legislation is ambitious, fit for the purpose, proportionate, clear, transparent and comprehensive. This can, however, only be achieved by increasing transparency, accountability, cooperation between the institutions. Unfortunately, the Council is not present. The Member States, citizens and stakeholders. Better regulation helps us to ensure that EU policies and legislation are geared towards the future and serve society. Indeed, there were several very good aspects integrated in the Commission's better regulation communication. Thank you very much for that. But sometimes with good also comes bad. And here I would like to focus on two specific things that I personally still am very skeptical about. While conducting our work, we need to be able to gain the trust of EU citizens and take them with us along the legislative process. In order to gain trust, there needs to be transparency. When looking at the regulatory scrutiny board, especially said transparency is simply missing. We have a board that is composed of 7 members, none of them elected, meaning that they are not accountable to citizens or us as policymakers. Additionally, 4 out of 7 board members are Commission employees, decreasing credibility and weakening its independence. I am very concerned to see that one of the objects set out by the Commission is to strengthen the board. For example, I believe that transparency in regards to the scrutiny board meetings with stakeholders, reviews, recommendations and opinions should be significantly improved. Moreover, the work of the board should not ultimately affect the Commission's capacity to propose legislation or unduly delay the adoption of legislative proposals. In 2021 alone, 1/3 of the impact assessments received a negative first opinion by the board, leading to the delays. And speaking about delays, the board gave 2 negative opinions on the due diligence proposal, and now we have to work here in the Parliament under extreme time pressure. The board can only provide an effective check on the Commission's work if it is independent and impartial, so this needs to be established. Therefore, we are calling for the independence of the board and for transparency of the board's meetings through making the use of the transparency register mandatory and also by publishing reviews, recommendations and opinions without any delay. And this is what I need to underline here, without any delay. Secondly, the one-in, one-out approach, which the Commission disappointingly introduced unilaterally without a prior impact assessment or consultation. I am personally very skeptical about this approach. I believe that the energy that will be required by Commission staff to tick the box could indeed be usefully used somewhere else. I believe that this approach must under no circumstances run counter to the objective of better regulation. Moreover, this approach should not lead to mechanical decisions of repealing legislation just for the sake of it. This is why we are calling for this approach to be based on a transparent and evidence-based methodology, giving proportionate consideration to all sustainability aspects, both in terms of benefits and costs, including the costs of non-compliance and inaction, and taking into account the administrative, social, environmental, and public health impacts. Coming back to transparency, we call on you, Mr. Commissioner, to take the one-in, one-out calculator to make it public as soon as possible and to obtain the support of all institutions before applying this approach. And one last note, I would like to thank all my colleagues and their teams who have contributed to the discussion on this report. Looking forward to the discussion. And dear colleagues, dear Commissioner, let us build trust together with all institutions.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilkins.
Spricht nun im Namen der Kommission Herr
Now, on behalf of the Commissioner,
Šefčovič.
Vice President Šefčovič.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, honourable members of the European Parliament. First and foremost, I want to underline how much I appreciate your interest and support for making sure that we do even better job in a better regulation. And I also would like to thank the rapporteur, Mr. Timo Volkan, and all those who provided input for this very comprehensive report. And indeed, in these challenging times, high quality and efficient legislation is more important than ever, so we can deliver maximum benefits for our citizens and businesses. And the way how we do it, it really matters. And we need to work together, and I agree with Mr. Volkan, to boost engagement, to work on transparency and trust of our policies. And to that end, we have been working to follow up on the communication we presented last year. And this has included updating our better regulation guidelines and toolbox. And I'm sure that you are well informed that toolbox now comprises 69 different tools, including a specific one focusing on all aspects of equality, fundamental rights, and human rights. Progress has been made, and I am pleased that our new generation better regulation is recognized as one of the most advanced regulatory systems in the world. The OECD, for example, ranks us as best on stakeholder consultations and evaluation. Mr. Walken was referring to the regulatory scrutiny board, and I want to underline that its independency and the best practices are actually the part of this success. I'm convinced that they are doing an excellent job by giving us crucial feedback on the quality and coherence of impact assessments and the evaluation we carry out, and on whether proportionality and subsidiarity being respected. And if I would react very briefly to the comments just made by Mr. Walken in this regard, I want to tell you that the Regulatory Scrutiny Board is truly independent. And the fact that they are very strict in their impact assessment, and they are not afraid to return quite a few, even very important legislative proposals, it's just proof that they do their job well. Because I think when we want to legislate, we have to make sure that we legislate in high quality, in professional, in a good way. And if, and it happens in every administration, DG do not do their job properly, I think it's only the right thing to send it back, so we will prepare and will come in front of you with a high quality legislation, with proper impact assessments, and with all the pluses and minuses properly evaluated. On top of it, I also would like to reassure you that they are under no political pressure whatsoever, and that they really do their job independently, and we are working with them to make sure that all the new or additional transparency requirements are properly met. I have to say that when I look at your report, I have to say that I was very pleased to see that European Parliament and the Commission, that we share the same ambitions on many aspects of better regulation. And I'm also glad to say that many of your calls for actions have been already addressed, even though I agree, and this is what our debate will be about, how to make it even better, even of high quality in the future. If you look at some of your calls from the last period, you asked us to make sure that we would optimize our consultation process, and we did it. We did it through our new call for evidence. I hope you will agree with me that now it's more focused, is more user-friendly, and it's available in all official EU languages. We are also more transparent on how replies are taken into account using new feedback tools. So if there was a complaint in the past, okay, we sent you our position, but we never heard from you, it was kind of black box. Now it's not happening. We are giving the feedback, we are responding to the evidence or to the contributions we are receiving. I also would like to thank European Parliament and to all of you who participated in the Conference on the Future of Europe for pushing forward another very innovative idea, and this is the use of the European Citizens Panel for even closer consultations with our citizens on our proposals. And I'm also glad to tell you that we are now looking into the way how to use the digital platform we used for the conference for even better consultations and better reach out, especially to younger citizens who are used to the digital tools. And I believe it would definitely give them the stronger voice. In addition, we are working on a more user-friendly repository of evidence for all legislative acts, evaluations and data sets to improve transparency and accessibility. We further improve the analysis and reporting on key economic, social and environmental impacts, in particular linked to the green and digital transitions, and our dedication to the twin transition is reflected in the adoption of the do no significant harm and digital by default principles, which I know are very important to this House, and we had several debates on this, be it in the committee or in the plenary or bilaterally. And we also perform systematically climate consistency check, which is very, very important, as our morning debate on the heat wave and drought has confirmed. Our 2022 Strategic Foresight Report, published last week, looks at reinforcing synergies resulting from twinning and twinning of green and digital transitions. And overall, we have mainstream strategic foresight to ensure that our legislation is fit for the future. Mr. Watkins was also making reference to one-out approach, which we have further integrated in our approach to help minimize regulatory costs for citizens and businesses. And I can assure you again, this is not a mechanical, this is not a deregulatory exercise, but one based on the new working methods with improved efforts on quantification. We started with a pilot project last year and will report on its outcome in this year's annual burden survey, where we will have more data, and I believe that you will make your own assessment of the process. And the future editions of the burden surveys will then report on overall offsetting, not only where the burden is coming from, but how we are going to offset it. And I'm also glad to see that the Parliament is also very ambitious, as we are, if it comes to the impact assessment. There were, of course, cases for reasons of political urgency, such as COVID-19 pandemic, where it has been impossible to carry out proper impact assessment. But when there is such a case, we will, and we did it also in the past, explain the reason why we couldn't do the impact assessment, and we produced a report with all the evidence within 3 months for your very detailed examinations. I would like also to underline that we not always need impact assessment, such as when the proposals concern matters where there is little or no choice available, or where no significant impact is reasonably expected. And regarding delegated and implementing acts, they are usually defined by empowerments in the basic acts, which leave not much choice for the Commission. However, we agree that there are instances where such analysis can be useful, and we appreciate if the European Parliament brings such cases to our attention. Honourable members, I would like to congratulate the European Parliament for a very important step you have taken. You established your own dedicated directorate to look at impact assessment and European added value. This has been an important step so that better lawmaking does not just remain a common objective, but with your directorate it also has become a common effort. And I applaud that the Parliament has started to carry out its own impact assessment related to substantial amendments introduced by co-legislators. The Council is not there yet, but we all need to work together, as otherwise we risk missing links and we risk being ineffective. The Commission stands ready to re-engage and engage collectively with the Parliament and Council to give even greater effect to our joint commitment to better regulation. And I would conclude by calling upon all of us to join forces to deliver on our ambitions for our citizens and businesses. And I really would like to thank you not only for great cooperation, for very important report, and for all the communications we had in the meantime, how to make our regulation better for now and for the future. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar Šefčovič.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Šefčovič.
Den Kollegen Sagard sehe ich nicht,
now,
dann spricht
I don't see
für eine
our
Minute Herr
colleague
Kollege
Sagard,
Scholz.
so now Mr. Scholz has the floor.
Danke, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, President, Mr. Vice President. Let me start by thanking the rapporteur for his good work on this very worthy report, and essentially see broad agreement with the positions and points of view which we, as the AFCO committee, have contributed to the work on the further developing
die längste Stellungnahme, die der AFCO jemals abgegeben hat zu einem Bericht. Unser Verständnis muss sein, Gesetzgebung hat sehr viel mit dem Lebensalltag der Menschen in den 27 Mitgliedstaaten und in der EU zu tun. Es sind diese Regelungen, die die Grundlage unseres Wohlstands erst Arbeitnehmerrechte, Klimaschutz oder fairer Wettbewerb sind ohne umfangreiche Gesetzgebung undenkbar. Notwendig ist deshalb die individuelle Folgenabschätzung jeder einzelnen Initiative. Den One-in, One-out-Grundsatz, den halte ich persönlich für ungeeignet, da rein formale Kriterien zur Bewertung von Gesetzen angewandt werden. Wichtiger ist doch der Inhalt. Es sollte besonders der Kampf gegen die Klimakatastrophe, aber auch das Vertrauen der Bürgerinnen und Bürger in den Gesetzgebungsprozess berücksichtigt werden, gerade mit Blick auch auf die konsequente Umsetzung der Empfehlungen der Zukunftskonferenz. Konsequent und inklusive auch einer Neuverhandlung von Verträgen. Herr Vizepräsident, Ihre heutigen Ausführungen werden durch die Taten bewiesen und ich hoffe auf eine konstruktive Zusammenarbeit. Vielen Dank, Herr Scholz. Jetzt haben Sie Glück gehabt. Ich musste da eine kleine Sache notieren. Normalerweise hätte ich viel früher geklopft. Sie lagen deutlich drüber. Es folgt nun Herr Kollege Barena Arza für eine Minute.
Gracias, presidente. Es imprescindible asegurar que la ciudadanía ejerza con todas las garantías su derecho democrático en el proceso de deliberación europeo, asegurando su papel activo en procesos de democracia directa. Y para todo ello es fundamental que las instituciones ahonden en la transparencia, muchas veces puesta en cuestión, como ocurrió con la iniciativa ciudadana que demandaba la Minority Safe Pack, que fue finalmente rechazada por la Comisión. La transición digital es una oportunidad para garantizar una participación ciudadana clara a la hora de asegurar derechos fundamentales tan necesarios en este contexto de amenaza constante por parte de sectores reaccionarios en el respeto a los derechos fundamentales y en contra de la discriminación contra mujeres, personas migrantes y LGTBI+. Para terminar, quisiera subrayar que el texto recoge el derecho a la iniciativa legislativa por parte del Parlamento Europeo mediante los cambios de tratado, como puede ser la Convención, y añado que es fundamental que los cauces de participación también de los Estados miembros se abran a la escala local y regional, así como tener en cuenta la realidad de las naciones sin Estado. Muchísimas gracias.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Barena Arza. Die Frau Kollegin, sie ist hier. Es spricht nun Frau Kollegin Regimenti für
Mrs. Regimenti, 1.5 minutes. Grazie Presidente, signor Commissario, colleghi. La relazione Legiferare meglio, oggi sottoposta alla nostra approvazione in seduta plenaria, riveste un'importanza fondamentale per aumentare la trasparenza, la chiarezza e altresì l'adeguatezza della legislazione europea a beneficio di cittadini ed imprese. Nel suo ruolo di colegislatore, questo Parlamento ha il dovere di razionalizzare e semplificare la normativa che contribuisce a adottare una legiferazione di alta qualità, garantisce la certezza del diritto e incide direttamente sulla competitività dell'Unione Europea, dei suoi territori, delle sue imprese. Abbiamo bisogno di un approccio più ambizioso per eliminare gli ostacoli e la burocrazia a vantaggio dell'interesse pubblico e di una attuazione più rapida della normativa che incide sulle realtà economiche e sociali nazionali. Con il nostro voto oggi, onorevoli colleghi, stiamo invitando la Commissione e gli Stati membri a rendere il processo legislativo e il sistema di recepimento delle leggi più accessibile, proporzionato, trasparente. Ci attendono numerose sfide, ma anche opportunità nel nostro cammino verso un'Europa più forte e unita. L'efficace applicazione e attuazione del diritto nell'Unione può e deve essere la nostra priorità. Grazie.
Effective implementation of law in the EU should be our priority.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Regimenti. Es folgt für eine Minute Herr Kollege García del Blanco.
1 minute for our colleague García del Blanco.
Buenos días. En primer lugar, quiero darle la enhorabuena a mi compañero Timo Wolken por haber sido tan exhaustivo, como siempre suele ser, en la realización de este informe. Queremos, desde el Parlamento Europeo, mejorar todo el ciclo de desarrollo de políticas europeas en un proceso abierto, transparente, que resista el paso del tiempo, que permita tomar decisiones informadas y que cuente con el respaldo de la sociedad. Buscamos fortalecer la eficacia, la transparencia, la rendición de cuentas para que nuestras instituciones sean más fiables fiables y eficientes, y que con esto ganen solidez por una parte y la confianza de los ciudadanos por la otra, todo ello en un marco de doble transformación digital y verde, de recuperación post-COVID y de conflicto en la frontera este de la Unión. Quiero detenerme en la cuestión de la comunicación e interacción con las partes interesadas y el público en general. El objetivo primero y el último de la propuesta. En nuestra ambición por mejorarlo todo con la visión de aquel que cuenta con la formación, las herramientas, el soporte y el tiempo para rellenar cuestionarios, no debemos perder de vista nuestro tejido de pequeñas y medianas empresas, de los autónomos, de las microempresas, de los trabajadores por cuenta propia. También ellos deben poder hacer uso de un espacio fácilmente accesible y participar en un proceso económicamente asequible que les permita transmitir ágil y eficazmente sus demandas. De ahí también que sea tan importante que la fuerza de este tejido industrial que mueve Europa y el conjunto de su ciudadanía esté digitalmente ilustrada. Muchas gracias.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege García del Blanco. Es folgt für 1,5 Minuten Frau Kollegin Thun.
For Mrs. Toom.